You just have a very emotional tantrum because of my other politics that have nothing to do with this current discussion. So get over it, critically thinking veteran. Not everyone has your politics. Not everyone shares your overall ideology. Grow up, be a man. Simple as that.
I feel like making arguments about where people come from or what race they are when it comes to an ideological discussion such as this is always going to end up being just the worst thing you can possibly fucking do.
I also want to recognize, because I was antagonizing an individual earlier, but I'm just going to keep going. It's very interesting. Individuals who want to challenge the ideas in the marketplace of ideas are currently silent in this conversation and have not contributed anything. So I want to make sure that that's on the table and recognized.
Before I yield the ground, can I please just
I know that you would definitely want to respect.
Okay. Now we're moving on to the next topic, which has to do with Confederate statues. Recently, a Confederate statue was taken down in Virginia of the Confederate General Robert E. Lee. 1 second, I believe I have something on this that I saved. Where is it? I'll have to find it in a moment. But the debate has once again resurfaced, as it has many times in history, about whether or not we should remove these statues, whether they're a part of history, they need to be preserved, or are monuments to traitors, etc. You get the gist. So what I'm going to do is start in the top left-hand corner with counterpoints.
In the immortal words of Indiana Jones, they belong in a museum. And what I mean by that is take these motherfuckers down. Most of them were put up in the 20th century. They were not put up in the wake of the Civil War. They were put up during a time when the folks from the South were trying to sanitize and revisit their history in order to make it better. I think it was called like the Great Revival or the Great Resurrection or something like that. But it was basically a time period where like Southern politicians wanted to reclaim Confederate history. The reason why I think they belong in a museum and not like melted down or pissed on is, one, every single time that you basically take down one of these monuments and you're actively going to destroy it, you're going to have a bunch of fucking Confederates who say it's not hate, it's heritage or some shit like that, basically have a fucking panic attack in public. And, you know, fuck that. Like, let's just get them down, stick them in the museum. And once they're in the museum, you can have a conversation. You can literally have a conversation about the legacy of slavery. You have a conversation about Reconstruction and how it wasn't enough. You can have a conversation about why these monuments went up in the first place. And you can have a conversation about their profound psychological legacy on the United States of America and why there was basically any kind of controversy with taking them down in the first place. I think this is two birds, one stone, while basically, you know, being a optical solution that gets things done. So that's where I'm at. Yield.
Okay. Demon Machine?
One sec.
Yeah, hold on. Is the meme
openings,
of
bro,
the Republican like
you're a fucking idiot, Zan. Take it down.
Zan,
you're a fucking idiot. Take it down.
No,
Zan.
I think it's TOS.
Zan, you need to take that down.
All right, it's gone. All right.
It's TOS.
Click the button. It's gone. All right.
This is the person who debated Lawrence Southern, huh?
What?
Hey. No, everybody quiet. Demon Machine.
It's okay. I really don't have any interest in the statues. I don't particularly like statues too much in and of themselves unless they have some sort of point to them that they're trying to really, like at my state capital in South Carolina.
I don't think the Confederate flag being in a meme
Xander Hall.
about
Mute.
Wait, I am muted.
No, we
not.
can. Well, how did I say that
hear
then?
you.
Why did I say that then, Xander Hall? If I can hear you.
Go back to
Demon
coping,
Machine.
though. That was pretty fun to watch.
Demon Machine.
Okay, so we just took down the Confederate flag like 20 years ago, I think. At this point, I don't remember exactly when they did, but it was atop the State House, and there was a big old argument about it, and they wanted to also take down some statues, and what they did was they came to this consensus that they'll take it off the top of the State House, way the fuck up there, and it's barely seeable, and they put it on the street. So it went from somewhere way up there where you couldn't tell, and then they made it in your face. So we eventually got it removed from there and put in a museum. However, I don't really care that much. It's not worth the fight. Like, it's something that we can all agree on, as long as we don't forget the history of what happened, how it was resolved, and how we keep going forward while staying together and not just dividing each other apart. I don't agree with some of the methods that people are doing by ripping down the statues, because you're going to get people have an emotional reaction because they're like, you're trying to tear down history. You're trying to make us forget these things. And that's going to cause a visceral reaction that you're not going to be able to fight with any sort of reason. So bring it to a city council, get them to change it the right way, and get everybody to agree as best you can. You're never going to get everybody to agree on anything. So that's all I really got to say about the statues. Thank you.
Okay. Next is going to be Fabian Liberty.
Yeah, so I have a bit of a unique perspective because I'm actually from Richmond, Virginia. I'm not doxing myself, right? So this is the monument we're talking about, which was the first Confederate monument ever put up for Robert E. Lee on Monument Avenue. I will agree that there are far too many Confederate monuments, right? We have 1,500 roughly currently, and over 700, roughly 718 of them are statues, right? Like, that's obviously too much. The majority of them were placed between 1900 and 1915, right? The NAACP was founded in 1909. We know why most of these monuments were put in place, right? They were put in place to cause fear, and to get a response of fear from Black people in this country, right? I mean, we know that it was used as a way of reasserting domination against those people as they're gaining some forms of rights and liberty and fighting that cause. At the same time, and by the way, it was called the Lost Cause movement. Counterpoints is what you're looking for, is the Southern revisionist form of history. But I think that the issue here has a lot more context, right? Which will obviously be brought out in this discussion. But I think the issue here is that some monuments probably do need to stay, such as the first one ever in the capital of the Confederacy. That is an important part of our history. But we don't need 718 fucking statues. And I do think it's important that there isn't just a lost cause movement in history, but there's a whitewashing of history in the other direction as well, and a lot that isn't being spoken about in terms of that, and the denial of that, I think, has caused a lot of the right wing Southern kind of Confederate types to fight back in rage and anger, because we're not honestly looking at the history of the Civil War, and I'm sure we'll get into that, and I'm sure that'll trigger a few people, and we can have those discussions later.
Okay, I'm now going to throw it over to Infrared.
Yeah, just gonna quickly respond to the thing about what Castley said. Well, the whole point is that what exactly are these private companies defending? They're defending the so-called American values, one of the most important ones being free speech. So that's why I mentioned the First Amendment. Otherwise, what are they protecting? Why are they acting as organs of the national security state in the realm of information? Now, okay, that's just a quick thing. Now, I want to talk about for a second also. You see, the paradox here with the case of the Confederate statues is that it's actually not about the statues. Now, on the question of the statues, it's my view that this is especially true for the ones that were erected in 20th century. Ultimately, I don't think they have a place. I have no issue with the statues being taken down. But because I believe this, I also believe that it is possible to persuade the majority to agree with this, so that it wouldn't be such a site of division among people in the country. It's clearly not about the statues anymore. It's become a kind of site of the battleground of the culture war between kind of cities and rural people, and this kind of antagonism between more educated people and more working class people. It's become this kind of proxy for a culture war, which is also extended beyond the Confederate statues and is now being extended to the statues of the founding fathers and other relics. The issue is not so much the content of the position of the people who want to bring down the statues, which I don't necessarily disagree with. It's the fact that it is a way of asserting the authority of one political faction over the other. The content here is not really that important. It's just the form. So just to be clear about my position, I'm not shedding any tears over statues being removed. I don't care. It's fine. But I also recognize that the objective implication is an acceleration of culture war between the blues and red, basically, right? So I think that's really objective significance. It's just a proxy for this deeper difference.
Okay. Now I'm going to throw it over to Jangles.
I think this has been one of the topics where I don't know how there's a discussion, because the primary argument in favor of keeping the statues up is so monumentally bad that I don't know how it ever passes any sort of like the slightest bit of pushback. You do not make statues to educate. Okay, statues are about creating history, not preserving history. We don't have these conversations about historical sites. If there's a battlefield during the Civil War, we don't have any conversation about preserving that. Obviously, that's history. Something fucking happened here. We don't have this. We don't even have this conversation about like, oh, here's like a general's like mansion. All right, should we keep this up for history? I've never heard. I could be wrong there, but I've never heard people like, no, that's an actual historical place. It doesn't matter if the dude's bad. That's a historical place. Stuff happened there. But these statues are not about preserving history. They're not about educating. You don't educate through statues. I don't know what your K through 12 education was like, but we never just went to a statue, looked at a dude, and was like, "I'm gonna have a test on this statue." Just a statue, none of the information, just a statue. No, you don't educate people. You venerate through statues. You do not educate. All right, that's why like we don't put these things like these weren't erected in like cemeteries. Or at least like the modern ones weren't erected in cemeteries. They were erected in like town squares, public areas. They were there to like be a symbol. I would even say like we're going to talk about the founding fathers a little bit later, but like yeah, the statues of like George Washington and Lincoln are there statues of George Washington? Probably, but they don't educate people about these guys. They're there to venerate. They're there to like prop up the founding fathers as these big great men. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like you can make statues of great people, but we shouldn't pretend that it's about education. It's about venerating. It's about like making these people seem like larger than life and wonderful figures. Like so. Yeah, I don't see the historical value in these statues at all. Statues are not there for that. You can have statues that commemorate a specific like issue, or statues that commemorate a specific event. Yeah, awesome, but they're not educating people. And if you say that they're about preserving history, I think you're being disingenuous is the spicy word I would use. But I think you're off the mark.
Next is going to be Joe Lewis.
Yeah. A lot of sentiments that I hold and believe were expressed earlier. I do believe that these statues don't have any place in the public sphere. I do think that the place moving forward, considering how the laws are currently constructed, is that these local communities have to have conversations with their councils and governments and figure out, okay, what statues can we deal with? What statues can't we deal with? For example, in New Jersey, we have a monument. I think it's in Salem County. It's in a cemetery that is protected by the Department of Veteran Affairs. So the only structure that would be able to help get this monument and this commemoration of traitors out of my state is through the federal government. With that being said, I think that if I believe that talking about race is difficult in America because Americans disagree on the history of race, then it's going to be a long, hard battle getting these statues out of these places, because parallel problem here, and has a lot of intersect, is that individuals' understanding about race issues, the history of the United States, the history of the United States before the founding of the United States, as we learned through people's visceral pushback of the 1619 Project, is incredibly insufficient. We need to do a better job at having historical education in the United States, especially around issues like these are world problems. Like colonialism is a world problem, not just an exclusive American phenomenon. And there's a lot to tackle within what I just said there, and hopefully we can get to that. But that's all I got for now.
Gasly?
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. So just quickly, respond to something that Demon Machine had brought up. Basically, the point about free speech and everything, you can vote to make big tech utilities, but until that's done, there's still private companies, and so it would technically be an infringement on their rights. And then also to the point that Haas brought up, you do need to curtail some absolute freedoms in order to defend freedom at large. If private companies deem or even in this case, the government deems somebody to be acting as a foreign agent, undisclosed, unregistered, they can still clamp down on that and not then be a violation of your freedom. You don't have the freedom to do literally anything. Getting into the topic about the Confederacy and Confederate monuments, it has already been brought up, but it's worth highlighting that the majority of the monuments were set up during the Jim Crow era, and they were not, as Jangles had mentioned, they were not specifically set up for any purpose of education or even just, oh, this is our history or whatever. It was specifically done to intimidate Black people. And it was done to basically, it was like, let's just be honest, it was a giant cope. It was a cope over the fact that the Southern Confederacy, they committed treason against the United States. They fought a civil war. They got hundreds of thousands of people killed, and they lost. And they had to basically accept that slavery was over. And so they for all that time, they were in a giant cope mode about it, and they set up all these monuments. As already mentioned, around 1500 or so, as just essentially a giant cope and a giant glamorization and veneration, as Jangles mentioned, of these people, such as General Lee, who did say, that he would not be willing to accept Black people and white people as equals. And so there's this whole line, oh, it was about the states' rights. It was the states' rights to own slaves. Like, let's just be real about that. It would be similar to having monuments to the Nazis in Germany, and there's this kind of idea. Well, maybe we keep. It was mentioned by Scott. Well, we keep one in the Confederate capital. It's like, but that would kind of be keeping, monument to one of the top NSDAP people in Berlin. It's like, I want to get rid of all of them and put them in museums. I don't think that they have any place on public lands, and especially in the case of like courthouses and whatnot, because like, let's say that you're a minority and you're going to court. How are you supposed to have the impression that you're going to be treated equally under the law if there's literally a monument to General Lee outside the courthouse? That's insanity, right? So I think they all got to go to museums. I know a lot of people want to take it into their own hands and remove these, and there's a lot of debate around that. I don't really look, yeah, that's technically that's vigilantism and whatnot. I don't really have any sort of like hard feelings towards anybody who's going to do that, but technically, in order to do it the best way, just vote to have them all move to museums. But really, realistically speaking, you might need to have a federal law prohibiting them too, but it does need to be done democratically. It does need to be done through the government. It can't just be people going and taking matters into their own hands. So thank you.
Zan, and I got to use the bathroom. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I feel like the reaction to the bread panels meme that I posted makes my argument better than any words could. These statues have no place being in public places. A lot of them were put up during the civil rights movement as a way of intimidating Black people in the South. They aren't a symbol of remembrance of history. They're a symbol meant to terrify a group of people who have been downtrodden and oppressed in this country for a very long time. These are figures who fought to preserve the practice of slavery. Robert E. Lee, who I believe the statue is being taken down of, that's being discussed right now. I mean, there was a story about him and how he was particularly cruel to slaves that he and his father owned. This is a horrible figure. These people obviously should be learned about in school and in museums, and not being put up in the middle of town squares and in front of courthouses.
Sweet, free for all time.
Demon Machine, you're a piece of shit. Fuck you.
Do you mind if I step in? Yeah. So I think this really illustrates, I think super, and I'm not trying to be an asshole when I say this, but like your misunderstanding of Civil War history really, I think, illustrates kind of the issue, and kind of illustrates also Haz's kind of comment here, because your history is really it really completely negates class consciousness and what the powerful wealthy elite wanted and what the poor wanted, right? And what was actually happening. Right. Well, no.
And I'm
but your ability to perceive the historical context is devoid of that, right? See, like, what you have to understand is that for the overwhelming majority of Southerners in the South, this was about slavery. This was absolutely about slavery, right? And it's something called Herrenvolk democracy, right? Herrenvolk democracy is this idea that you use the juxtaposition of a class of people such as the Black slaves, right? And you use them as a means of keeping down the poor whites. And at least the poor whites say, well, at least I'm not a slave. At least I'm not a black slave, right? But what you also have to understand is that for the wealthy elite in these situations in the Civil War, right? The wealthy elite, they were far more concerned about tariffs, right? You have to understand the history of the Tariff of Abominations, right? In 1828, you have to understand what was occurring in the stock market leading up to 1857. You have to understand the panic in the banks of 1857, right? And you have to understand... You have to understand a lot about the history, right? So when people, you actually
have an understanding of a lot of the history. The question that I have right from the start is that how many of you have actually done this research?
Wait, CDV, why are you here?
I dropped the rap.
You're coming in to interrupt me.
I was asked a very specific question by the panel host himself. Why is anybody else talking right now on the motherfucking mic? Exactly. I want to answer Dylan's question. So Dylan,
wow,
the answer to your question, right, is that I heard a lot of people through their opening statements that clearly did not understand a single fucking thing, right, and it was only looking at this from a very narrow-minded point, and it's obvious that the knowledge base of the room needs to be fucking expanded. Like, for instance, did anybody ever consider that perhaps maybe that the reason that statues were erected had specifically to do with trying to make sure that the poor white population that got roped into the whole fucking Civil War and was fighting on behalf of the wealthy plantation owners that wanted to keep their institution of slavery in place to remind them not to be such fucking fools in the future? Did anybody even bother fucking considering that? No. So you want to take down these same fucking statues in an effort to try to bring that shit back? What the fuck is wrong with people when you think you need to get rid of and erase history so that ideas as simple as that can be fucking lost?
Wait, CTV.
I would love to push back on that.
There were poor people that were conscripted in.
Kevin, you can start with your response.
There were poor people that were conscripted into the Nazi army. Right? Like there were poor people that were conscripted to both armies. That doesn't make them good guys. It doesn't mean that we should have monuments of Goebbels or whatever the hell, or it doesn't mean that we should have monuments of like literally Hitler or whatever. It doesn't mean that we should have monuments of like Robert E. Lee. I mean, you can recognize that people that fought on that side weren't all racist, weren't all evil, but it doesn't mean that you venerate their generals.
Yeah. So let me ask you this then: who is the organization that actually? Who is the organization that actually
jumped in and restated my point with anger?
Wait for a second. CTV, you can respond. We'll throw it over to Fabian.
So who is the organization that actually opened that got these things erected, right? I would argue probably Daughters of the Confederacy. Exactly. So what was their nefarious intentions there? They wanted to have their family members that died in this war to be remembered so that we as a nation didn't make these same type of situations moving forward.
No, like how many of their family members was Robert E. Lee?
It's at the same time not to forget, right, that black people were enslaved and that we don't need to repeat that shit either. There's a whole lot of reasons why you would want to remember this history. Simply taking it down and erasing it.
I wanted to respond to Scott from way back when.
Wait. Okay, we have a lot of people in this room now, so we're gonna do this. Try to do this somewhat orderly. So CTV, finish what you're saying, and then we got to throw it to Fabian. Okay.
And to the other point a minute ago, right? It's not it jangles, as a matter of fact, right? Your point about like we don't go to the statue to study the statue, right? You're right. You don't. You learn this history in grade school, right, all the way up, and then when you see the statue, you go, oh. This is why I need to remember this shit, right? That's exactly why. This is why we have the statue there to remember people. It's true when it comes to Robert E. Lee, right? And some of the actions at Chancellorsville where him and Stonewall Jackson absolutely decimated the fucking Union Army, right? It's not just for that. It's for a lot of historical basis around the entire time period, right? And remembering George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, right? The World War II Memorial. A lot of these things that are on the Capitol Island themselves. So like, you have to remember the history, and if you don't have the history there to remember, and you regulate it to a fucking museum, and people don't bother going to the museum, then guess what?
This is exactly false.
It's actually not.
It is.
So we're gonna throw it to Fabian first.
Okay. Yo, I love you, CTV. You're an entertaining guy, but you basically came in and shit on what I was saying to make my ideas and educating people on the history of the Civil War into a meme. Like it's kind of fucked up. But that being said. Right, like just to finish up my point, right? you have to understand the history of the tariff structure. And I think and you also have to understand what this has become culturally for right-wing rural Americans living in these places, right? These are not, although these statues were erected primarily from 1900 to 1915, right? During the NAACP coming in, during the resurgence of the KKK, right? These statues in many ways were put up as a means to intimidate Black people. You also understand that the cultural context of today comes around, it does come to the issue of states' rights. It does come to the issue of federal overreach of power. And I think one of the most powerful things is that before the Civil War, people used to say the United States of America are a good place to live. And after the Civil War, the language changed to the United States of America is a good place to live. And I think that is one of the strongest arguments of how much the federal power grew and how much states' rights were kind of pushed to the side as a result of the Civil War. And we can get in later talking about the fact that if you take down any Confederate statue, you better be willing to take down Lincoln, because Lincoln was a horrible fucking war criminal.
Jangles?
What?
You're still muted, Jangles.
So yeah, you said like the same thing about 10 minutes ago, and it's not your fault at all, but I was going to respond to it then. So I can respect that, like, yeah, it's more complex than just slavery. Slavery could be the primary reason, but there's still more to it than that. But you would have to make the case
primary galvanizing force. It wasn't the primary reason, but the primary galvanizing force for the citizenry to fight the war.
Well, sure, yeah, but then you would have to make the case that these statues, like, do you honestly think that if we ask people, like, why should these statues be in place? It's like, oh, well, it shows us the history of tariffs and the stock market and class consciousness. That's what it shows us the history of. I don't think you can make a convincing argument for that. If anything, it obfuscates what the true history is. It obfuscates, like, oh no, it reinforces that, what's it called, the lost cause myth.
The lost cause, yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the things the Lost Cause was there. It's there to venerate the heroes, specifically and particularly Robert E. Lee, which is why he has, if I'm not mistaken, the most statues of any one general from the Confederate Army.
Yeah, because he's one of the strongest generals that ever existed in human history from a tactical perspective.
Well, sure.
And the Lost Cause, and there's a lot of reasons.
Yeah, and he lost. Cool. So yeah, but this is part of the Lost Cause myth. Like, you're trying to venerate these people. He was such a great general, fighting for what? How many great generals were like Nazis? Do we build statues to them? Who cares if they're a great general if they're fighting for the wrong cause? Like, that's what the statues are there for, and you kind of just exemplified it. Like,
it's not there to
in the Civil War.
It's there to venerate.
There are no good guys in the Civil War. They're both
it's there to venerate, and of course there was a better side. Come on.
No, there wasn't. They were both evil.
Okay, Fabian was responding to that, and then I'll throw it over to Kevin and Connor. Fabian?
Yeah, they were both evil. That's what you need to understand about the history of the Civil War. Slavery as an institution was fucking evil, right? Like, Lincoln was said multiple times that if he could preserve the Union and keep Black people as slaves, he would do so, right? It was only until Frederick Douglass fucking fought with him over and over and over again in 1864 that he actually even allowed Black troops. Right? There's a lot of things that people don't understand about the history of the Civil War and the things that Lincoln did. I mean, Lincoln fucking arrested journalists.
Statues elucidate those.
Right, exactly.
Do the statues elucidate
are you
those
for getting rid of
nuances?
Lincoln statues? Are you for taking down all statues of President Lincoln?
Why, that's the third topic, isn't it? But do the statues? You're kind of pivoting away from the point. Do the statues elucidate those nuances? I don't think you can make a convincing answer that it's yes. Well, then who cares?
But the fact that the average American is stupid is not a reason to take down statues.
But wait, if the statues aren't doing the
very discussions we have today.
Well, no, they don't. They obfuscate them. All right, statues are about states' rights, big man, strong, very good general. That's what the statues are there for. They obfuscate. They push away those nuanced conversations. Like, we can read books. And you have all of us, like, why do you need a statue? In 2021, you have in your pocket access to all information that has ever been collected. All of it. All of it all at once.
That says more about the people interpreting the information. That says something more about the person interpreting the information rather than the information itself, right? I.e. the information being the statue. If the person has a visceral reaction...
That's just not information. Tell me what information the statue conveys.
Whatever it is that it pulls from the individual and has them bring to their forethought, that's the information specifically that I'm talking about.
You already have to have the information.
You're assuming that the individual has nothing. If they had nothing, then why would they be having such a visceral reaction?
Because they already know who the person is.
You're right. So it's their fucking reaction that's the fucking problem, not the statue itself. Thank you very much.
CTV. Yeah. Thanks, Dylan. So I got a couple points here. I'll get to CTV too, but basically, it is worth noting here, it's been mentioned multiple times. I gotta emphasize it again. They weren't erected immediately. Well, some, but the majority of them were not erected right after the Civil War for people that lost, veterans in that conflict. Because you could see why people might do that, because they lost loved ones, and a lot of those people that did fight for the South weren't, that was just basically they were born in the wrong place and they were conscripted into it. No. Them being erected during the Jim Crow era was specifically done with the intent to intimidate Black people and basically cope over the fact that they lost the Civil War, and they did not want their racist sort of hegemony within that region to be withered away and have to deal with and come to terms with egalitarianism, because they were formerly in a better material position by lording over everybody else, and they wanted to continue basically forcing everybody else into submission that wasn't white. Now, as far as this idea about both sides were evil in the Civil War, I'm not claiming that the Union Army was perfect. Nobody's claiming that Abraham Lincoln didn't have his flaws, but lesser evils, right? I mean, this false equivocation is pretty goofy. And also, and finally on this, the point that CTV's brought up, point that's been mentioned about how, well, no, these are monuments, they serve to educate. No, as Jangles noted, they serve to venerate. But also, if the only way that we can get education, the only way that we can be aware of something is to literally have, I guess, hundreds of monuments of it, then how do we know anything about, the formation of the universe and all this kind of stuff? Because last time I checked, there weren't monuments to every random fact in the last 13 billion years of the universe that led up to us being able to be here. Yet we still have astronomy textbooks. We still have scientists that are aware of the history of the universe. We don't need monuments for all of that kind of stuff. These monuments, you could have these things in a museum. You can have textbooks to educate. The reason why you have these kinds of monuments in courthouses is simply to intimidate Black people in the U.S. Let's just be real about it.
So I just you're wrong.
Wait, quickly, stop. I want to throw it to Connor, then Haas, because neither of them have talked yet. Well, Connor has, but I want to throw it over to Haas after Connor.
Yeah, so there's this really weird contention that Mr. Fabian threw out there that I kind of want to address. Listen, I get that, somebody lives for an entire fucking generation, and then you can take a out of context quote. Holy fuck, is it goddamn interrupted again? Can y'all hear me or no?
I can hear you.
Yes.
I'm gonna fucking Sudoku myself. Holy shit.
We can hear you just fine.
He can't hear us.
Okay, let me just go really quick. I just wanted to address Castley's thing that he said in the beginning. He said there cannot be absolute freedom. You have to freedom at large. Yeah, no one's talking about absolute freedom per se, but it's just a matter of the freedom to have certain types of political expression, which is a pretty low bar as far as defending the so-called sacred American values of free speech is concerned. If you can't defend that, then what values do you have in the first place? It's an utter contradiction. This notion of freedom at large is a completely meaningless and vague nothing. Which only seeks to defend those unaccountable representatives in Silicon Valley and the deep state who are not elected, whose ideology is completely outside of the U.S. Constitution and the U.S. state. We didn't elect that. It wasn't accountable to us. So I don't see how this can be the representative of so-called freedom at large. That's all I wanted to say.
My deep state. No. Haas, the thing is, right, Haas, is that you should try reading Machiavelli sometimes. Sometimes you've got to be flexible enough to deal with threats in a way that might compromise.
You don't need to read Machiavelli. You don't even live in America.
No. This is true for all Western countries. You live in America and you simp for China. You simp for CCP and Xi Jinping.
Yeah, but so, why you're not the prince, Kevin? You're not the president. You don't even live in America.
Neither are you, Haas. Neither are you, Haas. So
yeah, but I live in America, so at least I can vote. You can't even vote.
I'm concerned about the preservation of Western democracy, liberal democracy, freedom.
It's not in our Constitution. Yeah, those words are not in our Constitution.
Let's be clear. Wait. Let's be clear. We're veering off. Okay, we want to stay back on the topic of the statues. Okay, does either of you have something to say about statues?
Yeah, just one quick thing I'll say. Honestly, I think everyone's losing sight of the ball here. It would be nice if this entire controversy about statues was just a matter of a rational argument, and then that's how it was going to be negotiated. But the truth is that these statues represent different interests and different sections of our society, and you're not going to come to a commensurate agreement based on arguing about it rationally. You have to acknowledge that to some Americans, statues have a certain meaning, and to other Americans, they have a different meaning. The best course to avoid the pointless division over these statues is to just first acknowledge that fact. And for the people who do want to bring down the statues, I'm one of them, I don't think they should be there. We should actually strive to persuade the majority of Americans, not just in terms of rational argumentation, but persuade them in terms of offering a new political alternative and perspective that will allow them to also be on board with it. So it's not such a point of pointless division. I don't see anyone who addresses this argument. This is a point of extreme polarizing political division. Division's not going to be bridged based on rational argumentation. It's only going to be bridged when we recognize the difference in the first place.
Okay, so
So
the reality
I
here is
agree.
you think that you need to
Wait.
Stop hitting
Too many
people with a
people.
steel chair.
Too many people talking. So, 1 second. If you want to talk, raise your hand. This is how we're gonna do this. Okay. Demon Machine hasn't said anything, I think, on this topic yet. So, no, Connor, if you've said things on the topic yet. So I gotta give it to him. I gotta give it to Demon Machine. He hasn't said anything yet.
The thing that bugs me is that a lot of what Haas is saying is pretty true. Where it comes to a lot of people are going to have a visceral reaction because they feel like you're removing their history, and you're going to have to acknowledge the fact that you're doing something to some people that do maybe have heritage, that are concerned about them being removed. However, you got to bring them along with convince them that you're not just trying to erase them. And that's something that I don't want to have happen either. We have to keep mind of our history, and we have to understand as much as we can about it. And I would like to keep statues maybe not where they are, but if somebody put in the time and effort, I mean, geez, like it seems pretty ridiculous just to.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by people being erased?
Well, a lot of these statues were erected by the Daughters of the Confederacy.
Sure.
Or things like that. So what were they trying to say? Or why did they erect them? It wasn't the city governments in the majority of the cases. How many of the cases was it city governments?
That's not engaging with my question. I'm asking you,
why were they?
I'm asking you, why do you think they were erected, and why do you think people feel like their culture is being erased? And who are these people that we're talking about? Let's be specific here.
I mean, whoever has heritages linking back to anybody that defended their states and things when the war was
What were they
on.
defending?
At the time, I think it can vary widely.
A Union army that was invading the South.
Yeah, like there were people that were fighting to keep slaves. Absolutely, it was a thing. But there were also people that were fighting because you were marching across their homesteads, and you were just like, "Are you with us or against us?" And I don't know if they had much choice, and they didn't know what to do in certain instances.
Oh God!
We're going to challenge these ideas, like you said you were going to in the previous topic.
Can I? Can I fucking do anything?
Sure, Connor. Yeah.
Dude, I've tried to talk twice.
Look, I'm just saying, I didn't talk the entire point of the conversation. I watched you try to challenge the idea when CTV came in here, and you failed the bar and veered off the topic. So I'm just trying to make sure, like, if we're gonna keep ourselves on our word and say when there are opinions and people who might intentionally or I'm speaking generally it's a commentary on the previous topic, and it's happening in this one. Where if we're challenging these opinions,
I would love to
ideas,
correct the record. Can I do it without technical issues?
Yeah, but I'd love to finish what I'm saying because we didn't have this happen in the previous topic, so I'm wondering why it's happening now. So if we're challenging these things, then we should probably then directly challenge what Demon Machine is talking about here, because he talked about erasure, right? And then I asked to be specific about, well, who's erasing, what's their culture, and who are these people if we were to identify them succinctly, and I don't think that bar was met. So that's where I'm at on it right now.
Okay, so this is what I would like to address. Is basically, I don't give a fuck about the revisionist history because, and I do think that you can make moral arguments about who was correct during the Civil War. The assertion that we couldn't was weird as fuck to me, which is basically that the whole reason why the Civil War kicked off on the fucking first place is because the Republicans said, no, you can't expand slave states out west, which the Confederate states were absolutely relying on in order to perpetuate the fucking the institution of slavery slavery. So when they said, no, you can't expand out westward, the Confederate States basically knew that it was only a matter of electoral time before the institution of slavery was destroyed. So as a result, they declared secession because they didn't think that they would have a stronger opportunity to do so, specifically to maintain the institution of slavery. I think there's something to be said for the fact, hold the fuck on, I'm not done yet. So basically, what I would say is that while like 90% of the fucking population didn't individually own slaves, they still benefited from slavery. They still worked on, slave plantations. They still assisted with the infrastructure of the plantations. And on top of that, I'm pretty sure there were a decent amount of, I think the average owned slave was like between 1 and 3 or something like that. So even small homesteaders still benefited from slave labor. So to pretend that it's not slavery, okay, bullshit, CTV.
No,
I guarantee you.
fucking wrong. If you understood
not even close to done, asshole.
Wait, stop. Okay,
I actually have a response to Connor's response.
So we're gonna have Connor. Wait, we're gonna have Connor finish. Then we're gonna have Joe go. Then CTV, since he's very passionate. I'll write down Fabian Liberty. I see your hand, and Zan.
Okay, I look forward to our fucking hot tub stream next week, but I very much doubt that you've read as much fucking history as I have, okay? So, basically, the fucking point of it being... Yeah, we'll see, won't we? So, the fucking point of it is, yes, the Union was fucking brutal, but they were brutal after pussyfooting with the fucking Confederacy for fucking 2 years under McClellan, where they tried to fucking fight the Confederacy with fucking kids' gloves, and they kept backing off of every single real fight they had, and eventually, fucking Lincoln saying that, hey, this is dragging on way too fucking long, we're not achieving any of our goals. We need to go scorched earth on these motherfuckers. Unleashed William Tecumseh Sherman and fucking god damn it, why am I fucking blanking on it right now? Anyways, you fucking know exactly who I'm saying. I can see his goddamn face in my fucking head. I'll literally go. Yes, fucking so anyways, the fucking Union went scorched earth on the fucking South, but there's still a moral argument here that basically you're fighting to continue to own human beings. There is a moral calculus here, and there is a correct side. And with that, I'll fucking yield.
Right. So then the reality situation is that you're forgetting about the
CTV.
I thought I was next.
No, I said it was Joe, then you.
Oh, sorry.
Joe.
We can acknowledge that there were slaveholding interests and non-slaveholding interests. So, like, I'm responding to you, Connor, but I recognize that there's multiple communities watching here, so I want to make sure like this is on the table, right? So we have and recognize that there were slaveholding interests and non-slaveholding interests. And as much as people want to believe that the North is this rightful, just institution that was totally dedicated and motivated to liberate African people, and as we get to social construction, Black people, we can recognize that both the North and the South were incredibly insufficient in that goal of Black liberation. With that being said, the South was very nefarious in the practices that they had in terms of maintaining those slaveholding interests. And that's something that I want to make sure is incredibly clear, because even though we can acknowledge that the slaveholding interests and the interests of the Confederacy were just wrong, period. I think we also have to recognize that the North and their compromises and this compromise of expansion into native territory and expansion to basically the perpetuation of genocide was something that both sides were equally complicit and complacent in. And I think that's all to recognize because I think it was Liberty that mentioned about the thing about Lincoln, and I just want to be on the record. And Dylan's chat's gonna have to cope and seethe. Fuck Abraham Lincoln. He was an insufficient president and a dirty, filthy centrist.
Okay.
But again, like we can argue about that. We can argue about that portion on another day, right? Because there's people who will get a very like visceral reaction to that. But when it was recognized that, like, sure. I mean, let's party.
He wasn't a founding father.
He wasn't a founding father. I was thinking about that. Like Jangles, you know, he's not a founding father, right?
I was trying. No, okay. I lost.
Okay, can I need to make this point.
I mean, I do, but I also want to recognize because I was antagonizing an individual earlier, but I'm just going to keep going. It's very interesting. Individuals who want to challenge the ideas in the marketplace of ideas are currently silent in this conversation and have not contributed anything. So I want to make sure that that's on the table and recognized.
Before I yield the ground, can I please
just I know that you would definitely want to
respond next.
There we go. Thank you, Dylan. So like reality here, check. Reality. at the invention of the cotton gin, right, by Eli Whitney, right, before this time, slavery was actually on the decline in the South. But when the cotton gin was invented, it made the use of slave labor, right, much more efficient, and therefore is what was driving the economy. The result of that had the North ended up creating a lot more taxes in the South, which further led to the divide, right? So from that point, right, understanding that part of the history and then leading up to everything else that you said with the expansion west, you're absolutely right there. But you're forgetting the key, which is technology that led to the increase in slave labor, which then created the further divide, which then had us go through the entire fucking Civil War and the division of the people along the lines of, is it states' rights or is it not? And this is where I argue specifically that had we just had slavery abolished from the start, we wouldn't have had this fucking problem, because I think that everything else would have kind of settled itself out. But because of that and the events that played out there, we are where we are. And this is exactly why the statues, just to get back on fucking topic, need to remain where they are so that we have real conversations about these real fucking things, and we don't have half-assed motherfucking dumbasses that don't know what the fuck they're talking about, where they only read half of the fucking history, hear the points that they fucking want, and then they substantiate those points by the half information that they have, and they don't go all the way into the fucking nuance and get to the very bedrock of it, which is where I settle at, understanding that the white poor population down here in the South is not going to be taken advantage of by the white elitists no more, which is exactly why we end up on the issue of states' rights and fuck the federal government. We've
CTV, not only you,
CTV vote to me directly. CTV vote to me directly and alluded to me directly, so I'd like to respond.
Yep, you can
so
respond
I acknowledge.
Damn it, dude, I've been waiting for 10 fucking minutes.
Connor,
Please
wait, Connor,
just a single fucking point.
you were involved in it. Okay, Zan hasn't spoken in a while. Kevin hasn't spoken in a while. Haas hasn't spoken in a while. Fucking Fabian hasn't spoken in a while. Connor, you're not the only person. Okay, Joe, but I wrote your name down. Joe, you can respond to that. Then we're going to Fabian.
Thank you. I acknowledged in my statement that there are slaveholding interests and non-slaveholding interests. We can have a longer conversation about every single slaveholding interest and every single non-slaveholding interest. But it's very funny to me as an individual who always gives me hot shit for participating in extended nuance, now wants to have this in the conversation about statues. So I want to make sure that's recognized and put on the record. With that being said, we can have an extended conversation about those slaveholding interests. As you recognized, you laid out just another context. To say that I don't believe or didn't think that I understood that part of slaveholding interests is just not true. But I just want to make sure that's clear. We can move on.
Talking time you like, Joe.
Okay. Fabian?
Sorry about that. Yeah, so God, this has really gotten off the rails. What I wanted to elucidate, right, is more, I guess, maybe somewhat of a centrist position here, right? Because I think everyone is kind of wrong in this debate. Again, I have to reiterate that a majority of these statues did indeed go up during a resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, and when the NAACP was founded, and when you have not the civil rights movement, but the beginning of those institutions that later led to the civil rights. Many of these were indeed constructed in such a way not to save Southern history, but as a means of intimidating people of color in America. Right. But we also, just as Has alluded to in his statements, we also have to understand that these statues mean different things to different people. I think a lot of these statues need to fucking go. We don't need 718 statues in the South. Right. But if you're in Louisiana, and you're taking down a statue of General Beauregard, and it's like the only one, that's fucking stupid. That's an important part of your history, like it or not, right? Are we going to take down all of the Christopher Columbus statues because he genocided Native Americans while also completely ignoring the fact that the entire reason we created Christopher Columbus Day was because of horrible things that happened in California to Italians, and that it was designed for the very specific reason to prop up a minority group that had been punished and had been marginalized in America, right? All of these things have nuance and context, right? And when you just start saying, fuck it all, it's all black and white, and then you do the same thing with your history, it really just shows your ignorance on the Civil War. It shows your ignorance in the conversation and the history in general.
Hang on, Django. Scott,
that actually hits the nail on the head. A lot of the reason Lost Cause myth and the CTV is, sorry, buddy.
Thank
DTV, I love you. You've bought into the lost cause myth a ton. The reason we let that perpetuate is to like have this comforting lie to like ease tensions. Like, oh no, totally. Yeah, you can say that it was about like states' rights and stuff, and yeah, slavery was on the way out anyway. That's totally cool. And you know, the South had great generals. Like, no, like these comforting. You just alluded to it. Like Columbus Day was like, oh, it's to placate the Italians. It's this comforting lie to ease tensions. That's not history. That's the exact opposite of history. Like we should be honest with our histories. We shouldn't like perpetuate these comforting lies, of which that's what the statues are there for. You're kind of alluding to it in your statements, but
right, but
they're not teaching history.
Hold on. I want to take things real
he's
quiet.
talking
Real
about-
I can reinforce a little bit what Jangle said as well.
Pause for a second.
talking to me.
Pause for a second. Who are you talking to, Jangles?
CTV?
The void.
That
talking
doesn't
to
help me at all.
CTV.
So Fabian
quiet,
and
Jangle.
CTV. So I'm gonna have Fabian respond and then CTV respond. Then we gotta go back to the
Right.
list.
But this is the thing about this idea that like you have to keep some statues up. You have to have these. It's not necessarily a veneration, right? I think the most reasonable solution to this problem is, let's say, Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia, right? There's already an Arthur Ashe statue on Monument Avenue. Fuck it. Get rid of Stonewall Jackson's statue. And you know what you should put in its place for Stonewall Jackson? A statue commemorating Brown v. Board of Education that happened in Richmond Courthouse, right? You take these things and you add context to them, right? You add other forms of those things. We can get rid of the majority of statues of Christopher Columbus. And in some of those places, we should put up statues of Bartolome de las Casas, right? Someone that actually fought for native rights, that fought for the Recombienda system, right? That fought in those same spheres. And you can put those two things together so that we can have a conversation about the historical context. But when you take down those things that a group of people have associated a narrative identity with it, what you do is you cause political division and you cause wedge issues. And all these fucking wedge issues about this bullshit thing about statues is so the Democrats and Republicans can continuously grow state power and fuck you over so that you can argue about fucking statues instead of paying attention to the shit that corporate fascism and neoliberals are fucking doing to you every goddamn day.
I just want to quickly say something.
I will. Haz hasn't said
go
anything yet, so I do want to give Haz a chance. Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, I think one of the biggest issues here when it comes to southern states in which statues are being erected is that no one is acknowledging a different interest with a different meaning. So I think Joe asked the question, like, who are these people you're talking about? It's very clear that after the Civil War and through the 20th century, there has emerged, or there was a continuity of a kind of rural Southern culture, Southern kind of culture. It's not reducible to slave owners. It's not reducible to the Confederacy, but for complicated reasons, reasons that are pretty clear, they have identified with Southern lost cause and so on, this kind of stuff, as
Talk about doublespeak.
as a form of identity, to just have an identity, because there are differences between the rural Southerners and other people, Northerners and other types of groups. And of course, in the Southern states, there also is a good sizable population of people who are descended from slavery, the Black people descended from slavery, right? So they, for me, are the most important people to take seriously when it comes to who can contend the existence of these statues. These liberal students who are not descendant from Black people and so on, they are descended from slaves, who come down, make a big fuss. I don't think they should be part of the conversation. So this is between rural Southerners and people who descended of slaves. I think they should have more kind of dialogue and mutual interaction because they attribute these statues different meaning. And my view, my optimistic view, is that...
Which is dumb, by the way.
Sorry?
Which is dumb, by the way.
Yeah.
CTV, I'm going to kick your fucking ass.
In my view, if this real dialogue can happen, I think rural Southern people, my optimism is that...
what the fuck are you going to do to be able to find out who these individuals are?
Wait, CTV.
No.
He is next, don't worry.
No, you're not going to go house to house. I think if there's an authentic encounter between people like this, they can come to an understanding that, yes, these statues represent a bad legacy. in the eyes of people descended of slaves. And I think this is a much more productive way of looking at it than just seeing it as a culture war between Republicans and Democrats. Because the real reason why it's a point of division is because there are different groups that attribute it with different meaning. So that's my...
CTV?
What if one of those meanings is based on a lie?
Let me talk about the order. Let me talk about the order so everybody knows they're included. So it's CTV, then it's Zan, then it's Joe, because Joe also wanted to respond. I've moved him up the list a little bit. Then it's Kevin, then it's Connor. Connor, I wrote your name down from earlier. So CTV?
Cool. So, Haas, how are you planning on finding out who it is that the people are that are on these particular sides of the lines? Are you going to say Southern right people and descendants of slaves, right? So now you got to start conducting ancestry tests on like all the people that come forward. That's the only way that you're going to fucking know. That's the only way you're going to I can just keep here and just keep fucking talking, right? I can definitely keep fucking doing that, right? So from here, that's the only way that you're going to be able to find out who these people are. You're going to have some type of ancestry to trace them back to whether or not that they were in fact a descendant of someone that was a slave or someone that was a descendant of like a white fucking rural fucking person. These people gonna have the conversation? No. Fucking everybody has to drive by these fucking statues and take a look at them. So every fucking American needs to have a fucking opinion on this, which is exactly why we go back to the root conversation of understanding why the statues were put there to begin with, right? So a lot of these statues were put there to begin with because of the Daughters of the Confederacy and them wanting to be able to have the history and heritage, remember, because their family members fucking died, right?
What history, what heritage?
So this is I named it off earlier. I'm glad you were listening, right? You go back in the VOD, you can listen in, Jangle. So from there, like understanding the history, right, on both fucking sides of this thing, because there's a lot of history of a lot of different reasons that end up bringing up this conversation and having people learn a lot of information that they didn't know before. Which is why I feel like it's very, very important to make sure that these things stay exactly where they are. Now, why? And particularly, Fabian, to what you were saying earlier, there were a lot of them that were built during the 1910s, 1920s. There were also some that were put up during the 1940s and 50s, right? So it's obvious to me that over time, less and less of these statues have been being put up. So is there a conversation about removing some of the ones that were put up in more recent history? I would agree with that. But the ones that have been there for a while, they have really become staples of, like, say, potential tourism to areas for them to be able to visit battlegrounds and understand the struggles that went into these places. I think that's very,
statues
very
and battlegrounds.
Excuse me?
Do not
You're conflating statues and battlegrounds.
Yeah.
So where are these fucking statues? Some of them put up at, right? Around fucking
courthouses.
Courthouses. What I'm trying to do is just make a fucking point that's going to derail me from all my motherfucking steel chair, right?
I guess it would like derail your terrible point.
CTV, we're gonna give you 10 more seconds, and then we gotta. There's a lot you're putting out there, so I want to make sure people have time to respond. Particularly Haas. So you got 10 more seconds to finish your thing, wrap your thing up.
Yeah, so the reality here is, Hans, is I was watching the first one, the fucking talk, and I've been watching this one. All you've done this entire time is to try to be some type of contrarian, right? Double speaking in the fucking background to try to win the most fucking people to your fucking side. The reality is, you're communist fucking scum.
Haas.
I see. Listen. I can understand. It's not very typical among men to be this emotional, but we are on a spectrum, and he is the more emotional type. So I'll give him that. So speaking about the subject matter and responding to his point, no, I don't. I'm not suggesting through a political organ or an institutional organ you're going to round up people and test for DNA. I'm merely stating the obvious fact that, organically speaking, from the perspective of sociological perspective, organically these groups exist. There are rural Southerners and there are black people in the Black Belt who are descended. This is their sociological and cultural origin. Speaking generally, there are, of course,
the Black Belt.
We gotta let Haas finish.
In the South.
Where?
All the states involved. I'm gonna get the fuck out of here, dude. I'm not gonna fucking. What is this, a quiz? Every single state in the Black Belt.
You're gonna say some dumb shit. I'm gonna ask you a question.
Well, there are black people living in the South who are descendants of slaves, and they appear to attribute these statues a different meaning. Simple as that. So what I'm trying to say is that and I'm discerning that the essence of the dispute here, why it's been able to be elevated to a culture war, is because the Democrats and the Republicans are exploiting an authentic difference in understanding the meaning of these statues. So all I'm trying to say is, if we can allow an authentic cultural, so on, not saying an institution is going to do it. I'm not saying it's going to be done politically. I'm saying we should humble ourselves to the perspective that this is not a matter of having a universal opinion on this thing, that these statues are grounded in real, authentic realities for different peoples, and we should treat it accordingly. We should recognize that fact, recognizing that is the first step. Because if you act like critically thinking fraud here, and you're going to base your entire approach to this based on trying to get the most clicks and inflame the culture war, but from the Republican side, you are going to end up inflaming a division that cannot be overcome, because you're assuming that the reason people have the positions they do on this question is because they're uninformed or they just don't know as much as you. The truth is, the overwhelming reason why there's division over this, the actual real solid basis of this, is the fact that for real historical, cultural, and so on reasons, different people are attributing these statues for different reasons, with different meaning. That's a fact. No amount of education is going to change that. No amount of being opinionated is going to change that. No amount of listening to fucking critically thinking fraud on the fucking radio with his partisan bullshit is going to change that. These are grounded in material, objective realities of these people. So you have to acknowledge that fact, and this is the first step to, and I hope this is the goal of everyone here in good faith, overcoming why this is a problem in the first place.
We're definitely here in good faith,
then we got to go
right?
to the list.
We're definitely here in good faith. So the reality here is that the double speak in your fucking language is advocating for like this opinion of like higher fucking like realization and everything else, while also being like, yeah, I think we should take them down. That's where your fucking reality fucking drops apart.
I have not been ambiguous. My position has always been that, personally speaking.
Wait. Okay. I can't hear.
My personal position is, and I've been clear about this fact.
Okay, I pause it for a moment. Okay, CTV, you're gonna finish. Then we're gonna have Haas have a 10 to 15 second response. Then we're gonna move on. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so the reality here is, Haas, like, while I can appreciate like this call to like an enlightened centrism, the reality is that when you come out and you say, oh, well, I think these things should be removed, it removes that entire thing. It shows your bias. It's not you trying to be getting people to be enlightened to history and have them understand the past. It only shows that you want to be able to remove the history so that it can be forgotten, right? So that's where the doublespeak comes in, and you need to understand the fucking standard, you dirty commie.
Okay, seconds. Just to be clear, I have not disguised my personal view, my personal position. It's not the doublespeak. I've put it out in the open that I do believe these statues will or should be taken down. But since I actually do believe this is the true position, I don't feel like I have to impose that on people. I think people can be persuaded or be shown so that it's not a point of division. Now, if I'm wrong, then my whole position is wrong in the first place. And if I'm right, then I'm right. I have no agenda, doublespeak agenda, to send city liberals to the South and take down statues. I don't care about this bullshit. And I know that it's being extended to things that have nothing to do with the Confederacy too. So I can see that it's not my agenda to forcefully erase statues or take down statues. My position is clear. I do think the statues should be taken down. I do think that it would be good, but how is where my position is distinct. Simple as that. I do not really agree with the view that there should be this crusade unmediated from the people actually involved of educated college people coming down and tearing down statues for the media spectacle. I just don't buy into it, and it's not very compelling to me, and it's not very interesting to me. So simple as that. All this doublespeak shit you're talking about is complete bullshit. My fucking position is 100% on the surface. I've been crystal clear about it. You just have a very emotional tantrum because of my other politics that have nothing to do with this current discussion. So get over it, critically thinking veteran. Not everyone has your politics. Not everyone shares your overall ideology. Grow up, be a man, simple as that.
Okay, that was the longest 15 seconds of my life. I gotta make sure that other people got time to talk. Gotta throw it over to Zan, then Joe, then Kevin, and Connor. Zan.
Yeah, when I raised my hand, we were on a very different part of this topic, so I guess I'll bring it back to that. It feels like a lot of people here, and I know CTV is definitely one of them because he was raised in Florida, or at least lives in Florida, raised in the South, Carolina, just like me. North Carolina, that's good enough. Yeah, when I was in school, didn't really learn shit about the Civil War, not as much as I've learned since I've gotten out of the South. But what Joe Lewis said earlier is absolutely true. While Abe Lincoln was personally against slavery, the war for the South was definitely about slavery, not so much for the North. In the South, slavery was extremely important for their economy. It's how they like harvested the things that they produced, while in the North they had factories and they had they had advancements in other types of industry that didn't rely on slavery. And so you saw sort of a split in ideology between the South and the North, between the North not needing or wanting slavery in most cases, and the South needing it and wanting it. The Civil War was absolutely, for many people, about slavery. These people that we've idolized, that we've built statues of in the South, were absolutely pro-slavery. And then I want to jump over to what Haas said earlier about how you've got these city liberals from the North or whatever coming in and telling people in the South and in what they should think about these statues. Most people in America that are progressive are liberals from the South. Not everybody is like a class reductionist lefty who thinks that that the black people hate the city liberals coming in and telling them that the statues of Confederate generals are bad. Okay, most people in the South that are black want these statues gone. They don't want to have these giant looming Confederate generals looking down on them. They were built in order to intimidate black people during the Civil Rights Movement. That is their purpose. That's why they're there. If we want to learn about these figures, we should learn about them in school. We should learn about them in museums. We should learn about the horrible things that they did. And we should also learn about the horrible things that people in the North did. Abraham Lincoln did terrible shit as well. So did the Northern Army. I don't know why fucking Infrared was bringing up that these are like city liberals or whatever, but yeah.
I never denied black people oppose them, just to be clear. I never denied that. You just didn't understand my point. You're probably not smart enough. That's okay.
It felt like what you were saying was that you've got liberals, like young liberals from the cities and colleges coming and telling black people in the South that they should be against the statues.
They're not telling black people, they're just taking action without consulting the black people living there.
Do you think that if you go to a protest in the South that's protesting the existence of these statues, that you're not going to see shit tons of black people from the South there?
That's a really stupid question. I don't think you should engage with it. So something that I think is incredibly important here, because CTV said some dumb shit, and I have to just gotta recognize this. Look, man, I'm gonna be honest with you. Like I mentioned in the last panel topic that people treat these things like games. So I want to make something very clear. I have family in the Black Belt. I have family in Butler County. I have family in Dallas County. I have family in Crenshaw County. I have family in Montgomery County. I have family in Gadsden County, which is the majority black county in Florida. So I have individuals in here who we can easily track because I am also an African descendant of slavery. So when we talk about the individuals who should come in here and have the conversation, have the self-determination about what should happen to these statues, I'm included in this conversation. But also, as Haas recognized, that there's also other people who have opinions and their own self-determination in these areas. So these are the communities that should have the consulting power to ask the question, what should we do with these statues moving forward? This is why we can't just wholesale take them all off the map. I would love to take them all off the map, but unfortunately, my state only has one individual statue, and my state also made a dedicated effort to make sure that we have open, dedicated conversations about slavery in the United States, and then all the consequences of that. Another thing that I think is incredibly important, because somebody brought up, I think it was Scott who brought up Christopher Columbus, we have to explicitly recognize that in the United States, identifiable groups are lifted up and discarded for political gain. So you can sympathize with the plight of the Italians, but you have to recognize that their plight was platformed as a means to platform and commemorate and celebrate a genocide individual, an individual who perpetuated genocide of indigenous folks and so many atrocities in what we now know as North America, Central and South. With that being said, additionally, we continue to do that with the Japanese, because again, I want to make this as clear as I possibly can. Racialized groups in the United States are lifted and discarded, not just for the interests of the right, but the interests of the left. And we have to recognize this with every single thing that we defend when we talk about identifiable groups, and especially white ethnic minorities.
Right, okay. Joe, you're absolutely right. And like just quick 20 seconds. You're absolutely right.
It would be a literal 20 seconds, though. I will count.
No worries. So quick. So Joe, you're right. All peoples need a voice in this conversation. So when there are peoples in the South that have statues up, this is where like you may only have one in New Jersey, but the peoples there are the ones that need to be deciding themselves. And it definitely doesn't need to be at the federal level.
I don't know why you needed time to say a portion of my point. That was my point.
It wasn't your point.
CTV.
That's why you pointed out that there was one statue in New Jersey versus
No.
there being an umpteenth amount somewhere else.
Again, like if you're going to spend the time to engage in what I'm saying, you have to engage in what I'm saying. So we'll move on from that and let Scott go.
Yeah, this is where like a one-on-one conversation later down the road would probably be much more beneficial because
you don't support reparations, so you don't know the plight of African descendants of slavery.
Right, I don't. But
so this conversation is one part of the reparations conversation, and specifically people in these regions.
So we can have that, but I'm trying to be respectful of not only Dylan's but yours and everybody else's time here. So that we'll just move on from now.
Kevin,
sure.
Okay, thanks, Dylan. So a few points here. Yeah, so a few points here. So I wanted to just address the question that was brought up by Fabian Liberty Scott, who said,
Fabian?
"Well, what about the?" Wait.
Is Fabian hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah,
Kevin.
I said I wrote you down. You can put your hand down.
Oh, I didn't hear that part. I apologize.
Kevin.
Okay, yeah. And so I was just responding to something that Fabian had said earlier. Basically, the question of, well, if we get rid of this other stuff, what is that supposed to mean? Like, get rid of the Columbus statues? I would support getting rid of the Columbus statues. I mean, you look into just specifically, even just look at Hispaniola, the stuff that he directed and oversaw there. You go into any details about it, you're going to get a TOS violation, basically. It was absolutely grotesque and brutal. The idea that we're going to have statues commemorating him, I've seen this on Twitter of people, one of my friends, for example, who's, Native American, racist, using Columbus as a symbol to try to intimidate him and whatnot. It's like Columbus is basically like a symbol of that, and it's not something that's worth having a statue in a public area. Now you can move these things to museums. I don't really see the holdup with moving them to museums because they still serve the education purpose there. So if we're concerned about people forgetting their history, well, we specifically have schools and museums for that purpose. On the point about what Haas had mentioned, he was saying how, well, basically he characterized it at one point as a pointless issue, although he did say that he's got an opinion that they should eventually come down. He basically said that, well, it's kind of a pointless issue to ignore or to try to make people not care about the class distinctions going on. I find that to be like, classic class reductionism. That was pretty cringy. We also saw this sort of thing brought up by, I forget who it was, but somebody mentioned how it's a wedge issue that's done by Democrats and Republicans to distract people from neoliberal fascism. I find that conspiracy to be insane because Republicans and Democrats don't really work together very well. There's a lot of division in the United States. The idea that both of these parties are going to get together in a smoke-filled room and come up with social issues to pit people against each other to distract them from Goldman Sachs or whatever. You can be against corporate corruption and a lot of the issues in the economy and also be against racism. And I got the impression from Haas basically that he wants to just give a pass to poor white racists as long as he thinks that he can win them over to become tankies or something. I mean, it is funny because Haas was talking about how he thinks that you need to persuade people about this. Yet I've seen Haas identify as, quote, 100%,
that ain't the take. That ain't the move.
100% tanky, 100% Stalinist. So this idea that he's all concerned about like persuading or whatever. No. He's got people. Like
your ignorance about history is not relevant to this discussion. The fact of the matter is, I barely brought up class. Calling it class reductionism is the high point of your stupidity.
I brought up class. The ANCAP brought up class.
Yeah.
We both brought up class.
I barely brought up class. The thrust of my argument wasn't so much about class specifically. You can extrapolate the reasons why I'm having the position that I do all you want. It's not actually relevant to my point. And Kevin, I'm not really saying that this is something no one should care about. I'm just insisting the bare minimum that fucking Canadians should just mind their business about this topic because it has nothing to do with you. Is that a bar enough? That's clear enough? Like, you live in Canada, has nothing to do with you, doesn't concern you. This is an issue for not only Americans specifically, but as my argument is, the Americans relevant to the controversy in the first place, specifically people descended from black people, basically descended from slaves who lived there, and the rural Southerners. This is their business. It's not your business. You live in Canada. You have your own statues. Sort out your own business, Kevin.
You've also made that point that we shouldn't care about atrocities in other countries either. You're a relativist.
Well, what do you want to debate about? You want to debate about this topic or 1,000 other ones?
We're moving over to
I
Connor.
already wrecked you in the debate we had yesterday.
We got to move over to Connor. Guys, I have to move over to Connor. Connor.
Listen, I agree with the authoritarian communists. Okay, the museums. Oh, go fuck yourself, CTV. Like, all right. So the point being that we should be looking for reconciliation. Some of these issues are not rational. They're emotional. They're historic. They're symbolic to multiple people for multiple different reasons, which is why the museum the museum solution is the solution to go for, to publicly pressure people to take, because basically what you're doing is you're taking them out of the public square, so you're not using them for their previous historical threat to black people. You're throwing them in a museum, and what a museum does is it gives you the ability to talk about the entire history of it. You can talk about the Civil War, you can talk about Reconstruction, you can talk about the lost cause revisionist history, you can talk about when the statues were erected, and you can talk about the controversies when the statues were taken down, all at the same time. They serve their historical purpose, they serve their educational purpose, while not being these fucking middle fingers to 14% of our fucking population of the country. So this is where being centrist is going to fucking work out, and I'm sorry, it's true. And then the only other thing that I've wanted to address the entire fucking time is that there's very clearly a morally superior thing here. Just because the Union butchered a bunch of fucking cities after playing pussyfoot with the Confederacy for 2 fucking years, and just because out of frustration, Abraham fucking Lincoln basically said, hey, if I didn't have to nuke half the fucking country in order to end slavery, then hold on, CTV, shut the fuck up. You talked for 40% of the goddamn panel. If you want to argue with me next week when we're in fucking mankinis in a fucking hot tub, you fucking asshole.
But you're so excited.
Shut the fuck up.
The passion.
All right, shut the fuck up. So I love you, but shut the fuck up. So the point being, oh, God damn it. You fucking made me lose my goddamn point. The fucking point being that there is a clear moral side to go here. And this is the people who were willing to fight and die in order to abolish the institution of chattel slavery. This is not a hard choice. This is not a hard moral choice. This is one of the simplest fucking historical calculations in all of moral theory. And with that, I'll fucking yield.
Well, the reality here is.
Oh, and that can be my outro too, Dylan. Dylan, that can be my outro.
Okay, gotcha. And was it pussyfooting?
Okay. I've been referenced like 4 times.
Fabian, you are the last one for the topic. Don't worry. Right now.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So a couple of things. I've got to go point by point because I was referenced in all of these. Christopher Columbus, right? Again, I already made the point of Christopher Columbus in contrast to statues of Bartholomew de las Casas, right? I already acknowledged that Christopher Columbus committed horrible atrocities. But what I'm saying is that you have to acknowledge that there are groups that identify with these things as part of their history. And there are groups that identify as these things as venerating periods of time where they were genocided, or periods of time where they were treated horribly, or they faced serious state oppression, right? And you have to understand that both of these groups grow together. And when you just start tearing down monuments, you just create a problem of division amongst many lines in America. And you have to do as Has did. You either have to convince a majority of people to get rid of these things, or you have to do as I'm saying, which is get rid of some of them and put up other statues and other things that venerate other things. The idea of the neoliberal fascism working with conservatives, I think like your understanding of U.S. politics and economics has just to be like so fucking below any like you haven't even started reading. Dude. If you have a degree in economics, well, then you're doing a terrible fucking job of representing that, right? Even based fucking neoliberal economists like Joseph Stiglitz, right, understand that the right wing and the left wing work together, and that there are ways in which regulations are written by corporations, tax structures are invented in certain ways, and that when Democrats and Republicans agree on things, it is often not to the best interest of the American public. And the idea that you say that wedge issues don't exist as a distraction just shows a complete lack of understanding of political history. I'm sorry. Like, you got to go back to your undergrad or something and take some fucking like basic.
Wait. Wedge issues are a thing, but
are they not used as a distraction?
No. But the idea that Democrats and Republicans get together and agree to keep this thing going as some charade, they hate each other. Like your understanding of this is like you sound like an Alex Jones
it's
fan.
Simple as
you sound like a tinfoil hat.
George Carlin quote, right? You don't need
George Carlin was wrong about a ton of stuff.
Right. Okay. I'm trying to bring it down to your level, right? You don't need a conspiracy when like interests align, right? The Democrats and Republicans
don't have like interests.
Yes, they fucking. You know what?
Not here. Not on these statues. These are real differences, man. Real differences.
I have no idea how you're this ignorant on economics and like political structure.
Okay. We have to move wrap it up.
Yeah, this is Dunning-Kruger right now on his end. So.
It's not Dunning-Kruger, right? Like, I mean, you can say that, but like, you're not even acknowledging basic shit you learned in undergrad.
So, do you have a degree in economics?
Okay, can we?
I have an associate's degree in economics. I have a bachelor's degree in psych and social.
If we're going to talk about the last topic, okay? We have to wrap this up.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'll leave it at that. But like, you know, this idea of moral superiority of one side versus the other, again, is not understanding all of the events that led up to the Civil War, right? And not understanding what occurred during the Civil War, right? Lincoln literally took anti-war protesters, put them in prison, and then dressed them in Confederate uniforms and gagged them and put them down the streets in Boston and Philadelphia, right? So that they could be accosted by people. Like, he arrested journalists. He shut down printing presses. He starved people to death in concentration camps. I'm sorry, POW camps where they were forced to work, right? There are no good guys in this fucking war. Lincoln was a fucking racist, right? Like, there's just no good guys in this conversation. And yet, just like there's a lost cause movement, there's also a movement to obscure the fact that the North had a lot of evil shit going on. And I'll leave it at that. These statues
the Union was better.
Have that.
The Union was still better.
Okay.
Well, you say it's true, therefore it's true.
Okay.
There you go.
Wrapping it up.
Can't derive an ought from it.
Wrapping it up. We're gonna go first. We're gonna start with CTV.
All right, well, I think it's obvious why I decided to drop in from the rafters and throw a steel chair at all these motherfuckers, because Haas was going to sit here and just be like the communist cuck that he is and just be like, try to be the most agreeable person in the room to try to garner the most favor from everybody, right? So, like, here we fucking go with that shit.
Imagine
I hope
being
everybody
polite.
is illuminated, right, to, like, his fucking level of thinking, right? So from there, right, Counterpoints did make a lot of good points about the history, right? So Counterpoints, looking forward to next week with a hot tub stream. But dude, you got to go all the way back in history to get into all these things. The reality here is, folks, is that there's this one perspective and one side that's being thrown at these things, and that's the slave perspective, and that is definitely a perspective that needs to be heard. Along with that, though, are a lot of the poor white folk that were not doing anything more than defending their homeland. They were faced with the real choice of the Union Army is crossing in from the fucking Shenandoah Valley. We got General Jackson up there defending the fucking South. Am I going to fight this fucking battle here at my fucking home all alone against the fucking army coming against me, or am I going to fucking come together with the fucking army that's heading up there to defend the fucking the South, right? Which one am I going to do? I think everybody can sympathize with the fact that, well, if faced with that fucking choice, given the limited amount of technology of the day, right, especially considering that we definitely have more availability of mass communication now than it has ever been in human history, it doesn't seem like it's that far off for people to go, hey, yeah, I'm going to go fight to defend the South. So from there, understanding those perspectives, getting me able to get into those ideas is exactly what these statues, which is the original topic that we're talking about, is what it's all about. And like what you really need to do is be able to understand all sides of the argument, no matter what it is. So at the end of the day, if I did anything here, I made everybody think, and that right there is the most important thing. Did I have to engage in like some higher caliber level of emotion that I can handle myself and maybe other people can't handle? Yes. But you know what? It brought forth a lot of truth, and that's actually what matters at the day. And with that being said, motherfuckers, CTV out.
Connor?
Hey, buddy. I thought I pretty much said what I needed to say, which is basically these things should go into a museum. I don't think we should be sanitizing Confederate history. That's pretty much it. Yield.
Demon Machine.
Well, I would like to leave it up to the local communities to deal with what they are. I don't want people running around being vigilantes against art or whatever it is you would like to call it, whether it's venerating or just spreading information. And other than that, I learned a lot here today too, amongst other things, which is very interesting, which is why I like having these conversations. So, yeah, if anything, I'd say at this point, it's more, for me personally, it's a little bit more contentious and confusing than it probably has been thus far. But go ahead, since we have to move on.
Okay. Gonna throw it over to Fabian.
I mean, like, I feel like by addressing all those things, I'm good. The only thing I would like to add is, if you actually want to understand the Civil War history, Battle Cry for Freedom by James McPherson, great book. It's a bit of a dense read, but it is on Audible, and it is a Pulitzer Prize winning piece that goes into a lot of both sides.
Okay, now I'm gonna throw it over to Hans.
Haas. But
sorry, wrong word.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's clear from me that critically thinking veteran, he has raised the fact that maybe there is some ideological confusion and on his part fanaticism about my other political views. So just very want to quickly, just in a second, 2 seconds or whatever, right? Just to be clear, why is it that I'm taking such a conciliatory position when I am associated with the extreme left wing in America? All I can say is that I don't think the American left has given genuine expression to the Marxism-Leninism, at least as I understand it from a global context. And the second thing is that as a communist, to my understanding, the aim for communists is to give expression to the authentic interests and realities of the people, and not our ideological beliefs and prejudices, but really the people as they are. This is the wisdom I've learned from historical experience. You can agree or disagree with that narrative, but this is just how I understand it. So I'm not trying to pander people. I'm not trying to just win over as many people as possible for its own sake. It is consistent with my ideology and deeper views. If you're interested in learning more about those, maybe have an open mind. Otherwise, let's just focus on the topic. Stop getting distracted by this ideological stuff because it's not really important. It's not essential to the actual content of the topic at hand. So this is all I want to say.
Okay, Jangles.
Statue's bad. I did something that I kind of came to realize over the course of this topic on the panel is that, and I'll admit this forthright, my history is like my degree is in like biomechanics. It has nothing to do with history. I'm not going to pretend that I know jack shit about history. And I'm really upset that CTV left because I wanted to ask him which statues that I should go to learn this history. But he's not here to answer that. So guess I can ask him which statues I should visit to learn that history. Now, I was going to ask, it's not fair to ask Fabian because I don't think he would agree with like statue teach history. But then he went and recommended a book instead of a statue. So I think my original point that statues don't teach history has been, confirmed over and over. So, yeah. Next topic.
Okay, now I'm throwing it over to Joe Lewis.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. In the previous topic, we talked about challenging the ideas of dissenting opinions, and especially the challenging of dog whistles, right? So I kind of want to address that portion with my closing and a few other things. It's strange to me how even in the face of the idea of white erasure and the dog whistle of white erasure and slave apologia, that those in the previous topic were willing to have a conversation about challenging these ideas outright, and that we ought to like challenge in the marketplace ideas and prove that the idea is not only stupid but inefficient and a bunch of other things. I don't think that bar was necessarily crossed in the real-time test of the very words that some individuals argued. With that being said, additionally, CTV said a lot of things that were dog whistles and they just weren't challenged. For those of you who are not sort of catching what I'm throwing here, so I'll throw it a little bit more direct. I just want to make sure that like not just this panel, but the chats and those who are watching recognize that whether you think it's direct or indirect, he was dog whistling towards the idea of white erasure and slave apologia. Moving forward, something that I think is incredibly important to recognize is America has never had a conscious and dedicated effort to care about Black issues and Black people. So when we try to have sort of policy prescriptions and solutions to these issues, this is why many members of the Black community, and even, for example, Marxist-Leninists also agree on this, that the policies that are brought forth in the marketplace of ideas in terms of solving these issues are incredibly insufficient and incredibly liberal. And I understand it upsets liberals that their idea for like, they want to be the ones that are the individuals of a just society, right? It's a thing that I hear in liberal spaces a lot. But in reality, they don't care about Black people. They don't care about Black issues. So when they even have the policy prescriptions to try to help Black people, that's why they're always incredibly insufficient and very vapid. The final thing I'll say here, because it's going to allude into the founding fathers conversation probably, is again, we need to keep on the forefront that the United States of America doesn't care about Black people. And it's across a vast majority of mainstream ideological lines. I would say all mainstream ideological lines. And then that also manifests down into different sects of ideology. Now, I think the closest individuals who acknowledge the liberation of Black people, I would argue, are Marxist-Leninists. And I think that's something we have to recognize. And I don't really, and this might get me in trouble for those of you who hear me talk and seethe and cope, I don't think it's necessarily productive to try to strawman MLs when they're making very good points in terms of like righting the wrongs that this country did and certain paths move forward. So I want to make sure, like, I just want to thank Haas directly on that, because I do appreciate that, because this conversation was incredibly intolerable. So I just want to make sure that's recognized.
Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. So just to close here, these monuments essentially have no place on public lands. If you've got private property and you want to have, a monument or something, whatever, if these belong in a museum, and so far as they serve as an educational purpose or a reminder of history, a museum is a great place for them. On public lands, they serve to intimidate those who were oppressed by the Confederacy. And you cannot just pretend, oh, well, it was about states' rights and ignore slavery. It was about states' rights to own slaves. And basically all this just amounts to a cope that the Civil War was lost, the Union prevailed. And I found some of the comments tonight about how, oh, well, both sides were bad, both sides did bad things. I mean, you can make that argument about World War II as well. And that's an obvious example of a false equivocation there. It doesn't mean that one side's perfect. But if you can't tell that the Union was better than the Confederacy, then there's a problem there. And I'm down to debate anybody on that at a later date. But just to kind of close up my closing remarks here, it came up a couple times about the fact that I'm Canadian, and therefore, how can I have an opinion about this? I find it interesting for two reasons. The first is that I was invited on here by Dylan and Dana both. So, I mean, obviously people want to hear what I have to say about this. And two, obviously I'm going to talk about it. I'm not just going to stay silent for the whole period. And two, I'm not a relativist. I'm not somebody who just says, oh, well, that's in a different arbitrary set of borders, so therefore I can't be opposed to symbols of slavery there. I'm somebody who supported intervention against Gaddafi because he basically ran the country as a slave plantation. I'm against the Taliban, and they run Afghanistan basically under slavery, especially if you're a woman. I'm actually against slavery in every corner of the world, and yeah, I'm against that in the United States as well. And I do not like the idea of venerating monuments to some of the most egregious figures in American history who, let's be real, if they had it their way, there would still be tens of millions of people that would be living in chains right now in the United States. So thank you.
Okay, and now we're going to throw it over to Xander Hall.
Wait, Dylan, really quick, I'm curious. Did you bring CTV on here, or did he just like jump in?
CTV is a force of nature. I will comment no further.
Did you just bring him in to do we were just following orders thing for the Confederate soldiers? Just for,
I didn't
like,
bring
drama
it.
clicks? Or did he like just jump in?
He jumped in on his own regard, and I was like, well, you know what? Why not?
Wait, why is he able to do that?
Is he CTV?
Conservative affirmative action is your answer, Sanderall.
Yeah, it is. I guess all I have to say is there was a lot of id poll brought up in this discussion. It feels like it was really counterproductive. I feel like making arguments about where people come from or what race they are when it comes to an ideological discussion such as this is always going to end up being just the worst thing you can possibly fucking do. It doesn't lead to anything productive. It just leads to arguments about, well, you can't say this because you're white or you're Canadian or you're black or whatever. Let's just cut down on the id poll, please, before I Roblox myself in a video game.
Okay. We're going to move on to the last topic of the night. The last topic of the night is about the founding fathers and what exactly how should we remember the founding fathers? How should we portray the founding fathers? It's somewhat attached to the conversation we just had, a little distantly though. So I'll just throw around the topic. I'll do the bottom left-hand corner this time with Joe Lewis.
Yeah, I actually want to make a plea for a support of identity politics. I feel that identity politics in the United States in the current mainstream discourse is incredibly vapid and just kind of turned into a very liberal position and a very liberal talking point. So I want to make it very clear that we have compounding identities that influence how we interact with different structures of power, whether that be political, social, and economic. And these compounding identities are how individuals are influenced by their politic. It's how some individuals determine their politic, actually, wholesale. And that's something that we do all the time and we acknowledge and respect. It's the same reason why people were very excited to cheer for Barack Obama, but it's also at the same time, Black individuals understand, as well as I, and I agree with a lot of individuals on this take, that Obama is a fucking war criminal. With that being said, I want to move on from that, because when we're talking about, and we're on the founding fathers, right? Where if we recognize that the founding of this country was based on a certain group of individuals, and not only the protection and preservation of individuals that look like those who made these documents, their families, their friends, their loved ones, it's very likely that entire groups of people, whether that be that they lived there before they arrived, or that they were brought on here on ships for the sheer and just direct purpose for labor, we got to recognize that this country was built upon a lie and it excluded a lot of people within that lie. And I really hope that we can acknowledge that the founding of the United States was built on a lie. And if that is not the surface that we talk about when we're talking about the founding fathers, then this conversation is going to be incredibly insufficient. So again, my position on this is that the founding fathers perpetuated a lie, preserved a lie, and now in 2021, we're seeing the consequences of that lie. And even in the face of the consequences of that lie, we see that the right and the left, whether that be Democrats, liberals, Republicans, all these mainstream individuals that are in positions of power, they will preserve the lie, perpetuate the lie, but then do it for the sake of others, whether that be on the left, thinking that they're the more morally just part of the political process, or the right who just don't want to acknowledge anybody and just themselves. So that's kind of my stance on it. If we can't say that the founding fathers perpetuated a lie, then we're not going to really have a good conversation tonight.
Okay, Kevin Cassick.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. I'll try to keep this a little bit short. Basically, the founding fathers altogether, by modern standards, they amount to fairly problematic figures. Many of them, of course, had slaves, obviously. But one thing that, actually two things that they deserve a lot of credit for is, they established basically a state that existed, that liberated itself from the monarchy, from British dominion over North America, basically, and they set up a constitution that allowed itself and recognized for the fact that they were imperfect, and that even if they were firm in certain stances. They recognized that future generations could look back on and say, oh, that was yikes, and laid down the framework to have a very successful constitution like in the United States, which has survived all this time, and laid down the amendments process and everything so that you can reform in a better direction. I do think that, you know, when we're talking about veneration with the founding fathers, you can look at them as people that fought against the tyranny of the monarchy, but you can also look at their personal lives, rather, especially those that own slaves, and say, yeah, well, you know, they did some good things. Some of them did more good things than others. But then, you know, slavery and whatnot, yeah, that wasn't addressed. But, you know, it was for its time still progressive relative to the era. It just by no means was anywhere near what you would hope to have. But again, the self-perfecting element of it is something that does deserve a degree of credit. So thank you.
Next is going to be Xanderhall.
Yeah, so when it comes to idolizing and sort of looking up to these founding father figures, I think it's extremely cringy. I'm not like a big fan of looking back into history and sort of like idolizing any figure. If we look at like any of the things these people believe or said or did or whatever, you're going to find tons of really scandalous shit. I think it's super weird that we like look back at these figures and we sort of put them up on pedestals like they're gods, like they're greater than normal men. It's just something that I find extremely cringy. I think like a good comparison to this is there was this like comedian in the UK that everybody really liked, and then it came out he was a pedophile, and they had a ton of monuments to this person up all over the UK. Apparently he was a big like household name, and when that came out, that stopped. People took down those sort of like acknowledgements and whatnot. He stopped being this big household name that people looked back on after his death as being this legendary figure. I think we should take a very similar movement to that. I just think it's weird to idolize people that have been long dead in the past, even if they like, we can learn about them and we can, you know, see what they did good and bad and whatnot. But I think like putting them up on this godlike pedestal is just super dumb.
Okay, now I'm going to throw it over to Jangles.
So I don't think I disagree with anything that anyone has said so far, but I might have a... Connor, I gotta go before you. I gotta take the citrus take. Fuck you. Okay. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of good conversation to be had. Like, these were not these, like, gods among men that sometimes that we seem to think that they are. I do think that it's unfair to morally impugn a person's character based on our own, like, standards for today. I do think that that's bad. I don't think that the Founding Fathers were evil, terrible men, even though they did things that by today's standards would be considered horrible. But at the same time, that's divorced from, like, recognizing the systems that they perpetuated and, like, how unjust inequalities have been, like, perpetuated for the 250 plus years of our nation's founding. I think we can separate those two things. But I think there's also like, who cares what the founding fathers would do today? Like, would you trust a scientist to like a scientist from 1760 to like, hey, what's your opinion on like the modern cancer treatments? Who fucking cares? They would know nothing. He would know nothing of the political structures. There's like over 2 centuries worth of like information that they wouldn't be privy to. Who cares what they would think? But at the same time, like, we don't need to like completely dismiss them. Like, I don't like the left, like, oh, they're just a bunch of evil racists. Like, yeah, they were racist. Yeah, they were sexist. Yeah, they were homophobic. I guess fucking you can't like anyone if they were too far back, right? But that doesn't. But the more important thing for me is like the way that we venerate them. It condenses American history and greatness down to like these individuals, and that's just not true. It is a documented fact that historians like have condensed a lot of stories, condensed a lot of the American movements, especially the American founding, into these like the founding fathers, like these 10-ish individuals. It changes like who's the founding fathers. Like, there's a reason I picked my beer tonight. Samuel Adams gets a lot of credit for like Boston and like all the things he did in Boston. Like, he was the instigator of everything that happened in Boston. No, he fucking wasn't. Like, it turns out there was a bunch of people who actually wanted to fight for revolutions. There was a bunch of people who actually like believed in the things that the founding fathers did, and to condense that and to give credit to a bunch of like individuals, to me that runs counter to like the American spirit, right? We can be a great people. We can, as a people, believe in freedoms. Like, we can regardless of where you come from, you can do great things. I think it runs counter to that dream to just say like, oh no, these great men, if it weren't for them, if it weren't for like these 10 fucking dudes, we would never have done it. I think that does an immense disservice to the American spirit. And I think that's what I'm not necessarily the most concerned about that, but that's the position I want to take during this panel because I think that's what I care about the most right now.
Okay, now it's going to be Haas.
Okay, so this is a kind of complicated issue, and I want to kind of isolate what is the grain of truth from the. I think there's a grain of truth being used by the mainstream elements of the Democrats and liberals and leftists that they're exploiting for what I would call nefarious ends. So basically, here's what I would say. It is very true that the notion that the American Republic was founding as a truly universal republic for all people, all men are born equal, and so on. Obviously, it's not true. It represented the interests of a specific type of group. So that's very much clear from history, right? But here's some important thing I'll say. I still think there is such a thing as a objective significance of America and the American idea as opposed to the British Empire, which many revolutionary and progressive and so on movements had to take for granted as a premise in the 20th century. The actors may have been hypocritical in regards to the full consequences and extent of this idea, but that doesn't change the fact that the founding fathers are the founding fathers of what we call the United States, the American state. It's very clear, for example, that slaves and descendants of slaves never were able to ever get to a point of actually being equal or even just stakeholders in the United States as a project. The chance for this was the 40 acres and a mule, which, because land ownership is a premise of being able to be a part of a political community, a polity, right? This promise was went back upon. It was, how should I put it? It was violated, basically. And since then, there have been genuine, authentic aspirations among Black peoples and among other groups, indigenous people and so on, to have authentic national self-determination, their own sense of polity and national self-determination. I think the way to reconcile this issue is to recognize this need and demand for national self-determination while also recognizing that there is an American state. And we have to be very careful here, right? If the United States ceases to be, and the first step for this is obviously the elimination of the founding symbols and the founding fathers. If this ceases to be, what's going to replace it? Are we going to return to feudalism? Are we going to return to techno-feudalism, the British Empire? Like, how will this be negotiated? Who is going to be consulted? It's really an opportunity for tech elites and other interests to circumvent the kind of constitution and all these kind of things that were in place after 1776. So one has to be very careful here, despite all moral perspectives on the question, about what's really going on when it comes to this elimination of America's founding history or the symbols thereof. Now, a final thing I will say is that, of course, the founding fathers owned slaves and represented the interests of a particular class and a particular group and so on and so on. But I don't believe this was their innovation. These things had preceded them, actually, under the British Empire. And the 1619 Project claims that the British Empire was on its way to abolishing slavery in the colonies, but we know later that we have no reason to believe that because it was the British Empire that was propping up the Confederacy. So clearly there was a fundamental dependency there. That many commenters pointed out was from the very start, there was a tension between the American idea or the American project and the institution of slavery. There was an inner tension which was not fully resolved, but revealed during the Civil War and the events surrounding the Civil War, when the British Empire and France and so on supported the Confederacy against the Union. So we have to evaluate the significance of the Founding Fathers, not based on the standards of today, but based on what was their unique contribution to history. What did they actually accomplish? And to me, the significance of the founding fathers, as far as what they accomplished, is the American Republic, a republic that is by the people, for the people, and of the people. Has America as a project lived up to this ideal? No, it's not clear to me that it has. But I still think it's still meaningful, and it's still real foundation of a state, a continuity of the American state. That's all.
Fabian?
Yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised that the Marxist-Leninists and I apparently are on the same side on almost all these issues. I would almost in many ways reiterate what has said, but I think another thing that we can maybe look at is understanding the cultural context of their times and looking at it today. And I think a great example of that is Thomas Jefferson, right? Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. He very likely procreated with slaves, right? Which is, a form of rape, right? He did horrible, terrible things, right? But at the same time, I think a great quote I had a professor say once was, good men are a product of their time and great men rise above that. And I think you see that even in Thomas Jefferson, right? Thomas Jefferson was very afraid to quote John Locke, second treatise on government, when drafting the Declaration of Independence. And he didn't say life, liberty, and property, which is what he originally wanted to write. Instead, he changed it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because he was worried that Southern slaveholders would use the idea of property as a means to maintaining a slave empire. He also, in 1807, made sure that the act prohibiting the importation of slaves was passed, right? Because and that was to be to go in effect in 1809 because of the ratification of the Constitution in 1789. It was protected for 20 years that the transatlantic slave trade couldn't be abolished. And yet he made sure during his own presidency that right at 1809, when that was no longer protected, that he could get rid of the transatlantic slave trade. Right. So you see these things and you go, wow, they're so paradoxical. And I think you do have to look at these people in the product of their time and what they accomplished in terms of liberalism, in terms of using the promises of Enlightenment thinkers and bringing it forward into a government is extremely important. Now, obviously, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I don't believe in a state. Right. But I mean, I still have to look at them in their time and many of their libertarian ideas and philosophies and the minarchist, kind of constitution that they created and set forth for us. And in a lot of ways that has been abandoned, and a lot of those promises to people, obviously only extended to white men that were property owners. Right. But I mean, at the same time, we do have to look at the cultural context and see what they achieved, getting rid of monarchistic systems, right? And it's not until World War I that you see the ideology of that, with Woodrow Wilson entering the war, and you seeing World War I becoming kind of an ideological war between monarchies and constitutional monarchies with America there, and the idea of constitutions and parliaments. So I think that's a really important thing that we should understand, is that we do need to look at them in context, but also know that these were great men and great thinkers. And to say that just looking at their ideas is these guys are backwards because of the product of their time, and not looking at some of the genius writings of Thomas Jefferson and Madison and Monroe and Hamilton and Franklin would do a great disservice in increasing the poverty of philosophy and education that we have in America, because there's a lot of good stuff there, but we also need to make sure we frame it in the context of the time.
Okay, next is going to be Demon Machine, then Connor.
Well, thank you, Fabian, for taking most of my points, you ass. I was going to bring up the part about life, liberty, and pursuit of property versus happiness, etc. That was pretty frustrating. But the thing that I would have to say is, if you just want to take a smooth brain take of it, is these dudes took on a fucking empire. And they did have some help with the French and obviously various other, and even Native American tribes and things like that. But I also want to give a little credit to something I learned this past week when I was on vacation in Charleston, where a lot of that shit happened, where the Tea Party Revolution, which happened all along the East Coast, it happened here in the dates-wise. It actually happened in Charleston first, where they started protesting the tea tariffs and things like that. And then it happened a few days later in Boston, where they dumped it into the fucking ocean. And so it was a very large thing that was happening, that they were working with lack of communication, and they led a revolution that succeeded against the largest navy that had existed up until that point. So, I mean, there is some credit where they got some shit done. Also, very much like a lot of their thinking of how to go forward to let the document that they wrote also kind of be able to be molded with the times as it goes on, to where it's not just stuck in 1776 when they originally wrote it, etc. So I don't want to just tear them down and be like, we should get rid of them. I think that would be stupid, because you're throwing away a lot of really interesting knowledge with that. And so that's pretty much it.
Connor?
Yeah, we have quite a bit of contention. So I'm happy, again, to be aligned with an authoritarian communist. It's pissing me off, but, that's great. So what did the founding fathers actually accomplish? The American Republic. Yeah. Has it lived up to its ideals? No. No society lives up to its ideals. That's why they're called fucking ideals. They're things to be striven for. They're virtues or principles. If you look at historically back at any society, you look at the Roman Republic. Was it perfect? Fuck no. Was Greek democracy perfect? No, of course not. It doesn't matter what geographic locale or what people you go to. There's going to be espoused principles, and there's going to be failures of those espoused principles, and they're going to be dealing with the material conditions that they're surrounded by. People don't just fucking impose 20th century or 21st century morality into the fucking, 19th or 18th century as fucking perfect, like, emotional and fucking moral avatars. It's bullshit. And then on top of that, so one of the things that was pointed out was Thomas Jefferson intentionally sabotaging the institution of slavery. They basically knew that if they tried to go after it wholesale, they wouldn't be able to achieve the revolution. So they made a compromise. And as a result, they held on to something that was nefarious. And as a result, people who founded a lie, who perpetuated a lie, sent 200,000 of their countrymen to kill another 200,000 of their countrymen to fulfill this lie. If you look at the morals and virtues of American history, if you look at the 20th century as a fucking whole, you can either be a cynical fucking bastard and say it's all bullshit, or you can say that these are virtues and principles that we haven't lived up to, that we're trying to live up to, and that we fucked up the entire time. And the fact that, like, the fact that the insistence is that we're going to have a contention. Well, you're goddamn right. We're going to have a contention. You want to turn around and you want to tell American kids their entire fucking country, their entire the Civil War, World War II, World War I, it's all based on a fucking lie? Get the fuck out of here. I'm not going to tell my kid that shit, and I'm not going to let that be the fucking education of my goddamn country. Are you fucking kidding me? Especially when there's a whole bunch of contradictory fucking evidence that points in the exact opposite direction. I have no idea what I get why it would be fucking personal. But I think you're completely ignoring any evidence to the contrary of your position. So that lie meant many different things to many different people. And again, hundreds of thousands of people have died in order to fulfill that quote unquote lie. Then finally, maybe not finally, don't worship the people, look at their ideals. That we can agree with. I think Xander Hall said that shit. But these are great men by definition. They are people who have been vested with power and opportunity. And this is the thing. If you look at people, obviously they're products of their fucking time, but by definition, there's plenty of people, we hold these people to historical criticism because they didn't use their power in a way that benefited them during that time. But when you look at people who achieve something with their power and their opportunity and it becomes something else, then you do laud those people because they exercise virtue in ways that are risky. As brought up by Demon Machine, as brought up by Fabian, these weren't some random like philosopher douchebags who came up with fucking ideas and then implemented them in a vacuum. They were fighting the world's most powerful empire at that time and beat it. That's fucking insane. So to act like they're stateless, moral, fucking virtueless douchebags is bullshit. So Jangles, going to go after you a little bit. Who cares what the founding political structures from 200 years ago? These were students of history. These were people who specifically studied the Roman Republic and Greek democracy, looked at all of the failures of power, and said, how do we create a social institution that can that is simultaneously rigid enough to give a society a structural framework on which to base itself, but flexible enough that it can perpetuate itself thousands of years into the future as long as people wield power in an appropriate way. Those are important questions that have been failed throughout history for fucking millennia. And we are literally the oldest fucking democracy on the planet because these people asked the right questions at the right time. So the fucking thing that bugs the shit out of me is these things are not without consequence. They have not occurred within a moral fucking vacuum. They were difficult to fucking implement. They involved blood and fucking treasure and sacrifice. And guess what? When you try to impose your fucking ideals on society, you're going to find out that it's going to demand a lot more of you than just fucking philosophizing in a goddamn room with 9 fucking assholes. Yield.
Okay. For everybody in chat, I would like to say that I've been pushing my YouTube a lot lately. If you go to Dylan Burns TV on YouTube and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. And these shows take time and effort to produce, and any subs, donos, or anything want to throw towards the channel, I would appreciate. The last topic of the night, it is open for discussion.
So,
All right,
something
so
I do want
can I jump in
kind
since
of
Connor
bring up real quick is the fact that also something else that the Founding Fathers did was they put a lot on the fucking line. If they lost, they were all executed. End of story. Like, they wouldn't have been questions asked. They would have been hung. So it wasn't like they were going to do this, and then if it didn't work out, they were just going to go home and go to their farm.
But we can extend that and understand that the very people they enslaved would have been hung, killed, raped, regardless of their outcome. I think it's something we ought to recognize at the same time if we are going to appease to counterpoints. Or sorry, God, Jesus Christ, I'm sorry, Connor.
It doesn't matter. Who are you talking about? You talking about slave rebels? Like
no,
like
I'm
people who
speaking.
fight
I'm
for their
like
slavery?
let me finish the point all the way. Like we recognize that the stakes were high for these individuals creating something separate and trying and advocating and pushing towards their own self-determination. We can also recognize at the same time the very tools that they used, which were people, never achieved that self-determination. So if we're talking about contradictions, there's one right there that it's a very easy thing, which I'm not saying like, I'm saying if you in the context of people who might be listening, like if you were to take a history course or any history course, there's sort of conversation about those contradictions. Like why is it that there's a group of people advocating for their own self-determination while simultaneously at the same time taking that self-determination from others? And then it doesn't matter what the stakes were for Africans. It didn't matter if the goals were met or lost, they were still going to be dehumanized, brutalized, no different than the indigenous people for the land that they stole from. And then what sucks, right, is when we try to have those complicated conversations about the very contradictions that exist in the United States of America, what we now know as the United States. There is a movement that wants to push back and say, we cannot talk about these things are in the past, but then there's a simultaneous recognition or contradiction that we ought to make sure we recognize and understand the full complication of the Founding Fathers.
Okay, so what I would like to answer, I would just like to answer your question flat out, even though I already know you know the answer, because I want to basically say it for the audience, right?
Right.
The reason why this contradiction exists is because of religious and pseudoscientific racist philosophy that people believed at the time. That Black people were a subgenre of human beings, that they weren't real human beings, or alternatively, they were the tribe of Cain that was punished by God, and therefore it was morally acceptable to enslave them because basically they had committed some grievous sin against Yahweh, right? These are the religious and pseudoscientific justifications that people told themselves in order to dehumanize Black folk and keep them out of this great ideal. I don't have a problem with talking about those kinds of things. And on top of that, I think we have to reckon with those things, because if we don't, then basically what's happening is it's like, oh, all the fucking conservatives get on their hands and knees and metaphorically blow the Founding Fathers without acknowledging any of their fucking sins. which is a fucking problem because obviously we can talk about all this nefarious bullshit that was going on at the time. But then my problem with kind of like, let's just face it, lie is a very strong word. Okay.
Sure.
The problem that I'm like viscerally knee-jerky defensive about this is because I know 200,000 Union soldiers died killing another 200,000 Confederate soldiers in the name of, sure, maintaining the Union, but ultimately with the fucking goal of abolishing slavery within the United States. So I'm not comfortable saying that they died for a lie. You could say that they died for an incomplete project. You could say that they died for values and ideals that we haven't lived up to even to this day. I am comfortable saying that. I'm not comfortable saying that they died for a lie. Fuck
sure,
that.
but we can recognize, however, right? So again, and we're talking about stakes in conversations, right? Like if we look historically, the United States is not, as I mentioned earlier, the United States is not designed for Black people, period. And this is historically reinforced. It is socially reinforced, economically reinforced, and politically reinforced. And then what happens is when specifically Black people, Black radicals, Black nationalists argue these things, I don't think it's fair or representative of the argument to start arguing the semantics of potential charged language, because oppressed people will have charged language about the analysis of their phenomena. And that can be something that you can disagree upon. But I don't think that actually engages fully in the conversation about what do we do to make sure that we don't fall into those same traps in the first place. You know what I'm saying? So like, as an example, right, if we understand that civil rights in the United States is in jeopardy and has always been in jeopardy, and it's a weapon that the right uses to try to strip the rights of people, we got to start approaching those problems in some type of pragmatic way. But even in the face of that pragmatism, there's still a fight of like, well, this is too far, or maybe this isn't like what we ought to do. We should do this instead. And like the core of my argument, when it comes to righting the wrongs of or putting us on a better path, is we have to have the faces and stories and perspectives and history of oppressed people in the United States in the forefront, alongside all those other, I don't think you disagree with this, alongside the other conversations that we have of things like the Founding Fathers and the Constitution. But even that very statement that I just said is going to make people within somebody's community right now on this panel start getting very uncomfortable. And that
it's my community too. So I know other people want to talk, so I'll try to be really quick because I know we're running out of time too. So basically what I would say is, especially to my audience, because I know people are getting uncomfortable already, is this is what I want to work on with Joe specifically, is when Joe says, hey, I think that this country was built on a fucking lie. I think it's bullshit. I think that a bunch of fucking privileged ass douchebags started a war for their own fucking benefit, and they lied to a bunch of motherfuckers in order to fight that war. And they didn't actually understand or respect the universal rights of human beings. And they used pseudoscientific and religious reasons in order to dispossess people of their human rights. I don't want to jump down your fucking throat and call you a piece of shit. That's my instinct. But basically what I would rather say is you and I have a fucking problem. We agree that there's a problem. How do we solve that problem? And that's a really fucking hard thing to do. It's a really tough conversation. We can do it another time, and I don't want to monopolize time, so I'll just leave it there.
I think maybe to like kind of
after Haas is going to be Jangles, then Fabian.
See Joe's perspective. I think it's fair to say, please correct me if I'm saying the wrong thing.
Sure.
From a Black perspective in America, it is a lie from that perspective. I'm like, think about it, right? The founding mythology doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just like the founding idea of the country. Liberty, pursuit of happiness. Like, what do these words mean for American Black people? They mean nothing. They mean, as far if it's addressed to them and they are supposed to be included in the we the people and the for the people, by the people, of the people, then from their perspective, I could see why it is a lie. Of course, from their perspective, it's bullshit. It's cynical. It doesn't mean anything for them because They have never been allowed to have a stake in this country, again, in the form of land ownership. So ideas cannot assert their relevance solely on the terms of ideas themselves. They have to assert their relevance in terms of people's way of life, in terms of how they feed themselves, support themselves. And this is specifically in the form of having some kind of property, some kind of land. And black peoples in America were promised 40 acres and a mule after the Civil War, because even Lincoln and the Republicans and the abolitionists understood that if we are going to make black people part of the Union, really part of this Union, they have to be given land. You can't leave them with nothing. But this was not honored, and these terms were not honored.
Well,
So
to your point, Haas, not to cut you off, like something that I think is also true at the same time is that there's a contradiction in itself, because you'll have the right wing where they'll say, well, we gave you land, like, and then you think like, okay, what does gave you land mean? Like giving land that you're leasing out to former slaves to continue the work that they were doing, because you recognize they wouldn't be able to exist in society otherwise, is a lie of itself. And then even in that, like, there's a way that maybe you could pragmatically make that a fair and just system. But even in that, there was still like the idea of like, okay, who controls the land that you now cultivate? The very person that enslaved you.
Yeah, they were forced for the sharecropper system to, this is my understanding, to work on this land, and basically there was a continuity of the relations under slavery. So we, who are not black people, we should understand why black people will believe that it is a lie. But where I will give my 2 cents is when this is extended, when we start having liberals basically using the authentic sentiments of American black people to push their specific agenda upon the working people as a whole. And this is where I see red flags.
Yeah. Can I ask one more follow-up before you close? So do you think that do you think liberalism might be the reason why Connor, again, I'm going to put a lot, maybe a lot on the table here unintentionally. Like, I feel like liberalism at its core is used almost as a weapon to sort of rile up individuals like Connor who hear that statement or like, it's a lie, because I don't think that, like, when it sounds kind of, oh God, it sounds kind of weird, but like when I say it and then somebody who identifies as a liberal say it, I don't think we're arguing on the same plane of consciousness.
I think what I would say, not to just speak for him, but what I would say to that is that.
By the way, sorry, Connor.
Yeah, liberalism has a blind spot. It's not because people are morally bad or something. It just has a blind spot, which is liberalism does not acknowledge fundamental differences between people. By fundamental, I don't mean like racial realism or anything like that. I mean, people have different history, they have different culture and different experience. We are not just all the universal subject of the state. So I could see why, I could see from the liberals' perspective why someone would be coming from there. But overall, everything I said, despite all the things I said, I still think that America still, even if it is a lie, rightfully so from the perspective of black people, America still does have a meaning for the American people, right? So to me, I don't see the issue of instead of reevaluating the significance of the founding fathers, I think it is more productive that the specific needs of American black people for self-determination and so on should be more brought to the table instead of just rewriting.
Can I address this because
literally anyone else talk?
Before I gotta throw it over to Jangles and Fabian, who raised their hand, have been waiting very patiently. I'll write your name down.
Fuck, and it's all right. I want to feel bad now. Connor, do you remember the issue you had with me like 20 minutes ago?
Sure. Was it you said a bunch of old fogey dumbass white people don't know shit about fuck?
Almost verbatim that, yeah. Yeah, it's almost verbatim that. So that wasn't to say that like. So I feel like this that misinterpreted my critique of that. Like what I'm saying is like when people invoke the founding fathers, it's not just like people invoke the founding fathers to push current modern day political goals. And that's dumb. If you do that, if you're a lefty, a righty, I don't care who you are, you're very, very stupid, and you should stop doing that because you're inventing a fictitious person to do that. You said, Connor, you said, okay, they have this, they created this like a democracy, it's the longest lasting democracy in the world. All that stuff is true, but they did it 250 years ago. Okay, if they were to be transplanted today, they'd be like, "What the fuck are women doing voting? Are there fucking queers here?
No, this is bullshit.
Why are all these people of different colors around?" They would absolutely do that, and it's not because they're evil; it's because they're from 250 years ago. No. Anything you say that what they would do today, anything is going to be a fiction, and that fiction is going to be self-serving for your own motivations. No one's going to think like, "Oh, no, it absolutely will be." Like that's just how.
Okay, Jangles, you're you know how you were saying that you can confidently debate the right wing as long as you know what you're talking about?
Wait, we're so close to the end. I just let Jangles finish their point, and you're on the list, so you will have time to respond, Connor.
Okay, so no, if you disagree with the statement that if you say what the founding fathers would do today is not, if you disagree that it would be fiction, you're just incorrect. I'm sorry. So when you say that nobody's perfect, I do agree with that, but it feels like a deflection. It feels like if you're saying they had all these great ideas, what were the great ideas? Freedom? What did that mean to them? Why should we take their version of what freedom is? Why should we take their version of what equality is? Why should we take their version of what democracy is? It was obviously imperfect. Yeah, but if you're going to say that, if you're going to say they weren't perfect, I agree. Why should we listen to them? We have a better version now.
Okay, Dylan, for the love of God, if Jangles is just going to rant for fucking 5 minutes,
do not.
No. Without me being able to address, I am driving up to Kentucky tonight, and we are going to throw fucking hands. That's what's going on.
Just finished.
Dog, do not talk to me about like monologuing. Come on.
Okay, Connor's not responding then. We'll throw it to Fabian.
All right, yeah. So I think there's a couple things I wanted to say. One, I would like to boost Counterpoints' idea of the kind of the racial superiority idea and how deeply entrenched it is. And I think you see this best with Benjamin Franklin, because Benjamin Franklin famously visited an all-black school in New Jersey, right? And because of his experience there, he publicly stated that he changed his opinion on the inferiority of black people and their ability to learn, right? So you have to understand that these founders, they lived in a time where they quite literally believed that black people did not have the same capacity of thought, reason, or ability to learn certain things, and yet those opinions were changed. Well, no, I'm addressing Counterpoint's idea that when I'm just buffing it up, if you will, to address kind of the more general conversation. I think one of the things that we're missing here is a psychological understanding of how, especially conservatives and nationalism, plays into the portions of our brain that deal with sacredity and deal with religious concepts, right? I think what we have to understand is that for many right-wing individuals in America, especially those that tend towards nationalism, the founding fathers have become religious figures in some way, right? And as they have become religious figures, the ideal of them has taken on a life of its own that is in many ways, surpassed the actuality of what the men are. And so I think this gets into this idea where we need to start separating sometimes and understanding that there is the spirit of ideals and then there's the technical definition of things, right? I think it's really important that we approach things from this bimodal perspective and understanding that, like, yes, technically the founding fathers did these things, failed in these ways, did these works of writing, et cetera, but we also need to recognize that for a large portion of the country, the founding fathers have created this almost religious vigor of like the spirit of individualism, right? Or what Weber might have called like the Protestant work ethic that is being ingrained in these things. And if you don't, I know that you might not like that take, but if you don't recognize that that's a portion of how we view the founding fathers in this country, it's going to be difficult for you to parse out the contradictions and why they exist. So understanding it from a psychological and religious perspective is an important scope that we need to engage with and tackle if we're going to have meaningful conversations about how we view the founding fathers in this country.
Well, that's something.
Agree with that.
Oh my God! Yeah. So please, for the love of God,
yes.
Jangles, everything you fucking said is dead goddamn wrong. You know how you're
said it was all
talking about.
correct.
You were
Everything was
talking,
correct.
no. Stop confidently asserting incorrect things. You know how you were saying that you could debate fucking right wingers as long as you do what you're talking about? You obviously don't know what you're talking about when it comes to this subject specifically. Okay.
Sweet. All right.
So basically,
Elucidate me.
hold on. Fucking 250 years ago is not fucking ancient goddamn times. We're not using
Really?
fucking microscopes.
Oh,
We're not
no.
using
Wait,
telescopes
let
to
him
stare back
finish.
through fucking. We're not using fucking telescopes in order to peer through the fucking, the beginning of the universe in order to understand what the founding fathers meant and intended and
Would you
thought.
trust a
They
scientist
literally
from
wrote
250 years
down.
ago?
Shut the fuck up.
Would you trust a
They
scientist?
literally wrote down. They literally wrote down every single fucking thing that they said. And then on top of that, if there's political conceptions that still exist today, for instance, the balance of power between multiple chambers of government, has that changed in the past?
Does it look
200
the same
years?
now
No,
as
it
it did
hasn't.
then?
Dude, shut the fuck up. If you want to hear
No,
the
you're
goddamn
good.
point.
No.
Do you want to hear the point, or do you want to talk for me? Do you already know everything I'm going to say?
No, you can go, Connor. We can't hear
Yeah,
anything
okay.
anymore.
Yeah, okay. One of the other things that you asserted was basically that they wouldn't understand women fucking having the right to vote or people of color fucking having the right to vote. Bartolome de las Casas was an indigenous fucking lawyer for fucking Native Americans in the 16th century. There were fucking abolitionists who were founders of the fucking country who believed that in order to fucking advocate for a true and, comprehensive and a more perfect union, that black people and fucking native people needed rights under the federal fucking system. And on top of that, the first fucking suffragette convention was in 1840, which is literally contemporary to some of the founding fathers. So the fact that you're pretending that these dudes are like fucking wiping their asses with fucking rocks and we can't understand what the fuck they're saying, it's factually wrong.
Okay, respond.
I'm gonna scream, dude.
I'm gonna scream at you.
When did women get the right to vote? You said, "Oh, it's not that long."
1920
years. Suffragettes in like the suffragettes existed in 1840. When did women get the right to vote? After most of those people who were existing in 1840 were dead.
After black men.
Excellent.
Connor,
Isn't that
wait.
incredible? You did not address anything that I said. Nothing. All right. Would you trust a scientist from 1760? Yes or no?
Would I trust it on what? Astronomy?
Anything.
Sure.
Literally anything.
Sure. Astronomy?
No.
Absolutely.
All right, you're wrong. Sorry. No.
What the fuck are you talking about? They had telescopes. They literally predicted planets back in the 1700s.
250 years
You're
of
full
research
shit.
makes everything that we had better. All right, every idea
no,
that
no,
you
no,
venerate
no,
the founding fathers for, every idea that you have, we have elucidated on that for 250 years. We have better ideas now than they did then. If you disagree with that, I'm sorry, you're wrong. All right, our ideas of freedom are much better. You can say that. Oh, one fucking guy.
Why
hey,
do people even bother
a few
reading
founding fathers like
Connor,
a few of the founding fathers like tossed around the idea of abolition. Did they really? Do we want to like all these fucking cowards who like own slaves, but like in their heart of hearts, they really didn't all like slavery. Awesome. They kept in slavery to like keep the union together. You know why? Hey, we can call them cowards. We can say that, like, hey, that's the choice they had to make at the time. I'm not interested in morally impugning the founding fathers. All I've been trying to do from the very, very beginning is to say that anybody who tries to like use the founding fathers to like guide what we want to do today is an idiot. Who cares what they want to do? Not because they were bad people, but because they existed 250 years ago. They did not have any idea what our infrastructure is today. They had no idea what our information systems are today. They had no idea what our education systems are today. They had no idea what our financial systems are today. So why the fuck would we listen to them? Any time you evoke the founding fathers as what we should do today is a fiction. If you disagree with that, you're wrong, and I just want you to acknowledge that.
No, because you're wrong.
Give me a writing on what Benjamin Franklin said that we should do in 2021. Otherwise, you're full of shit, and I'm right.
Okay, I'll literally look it up and I'll find you something from fucking Benjamin Franklin that's fucking 10 head. But at the same time, why would anybody, based off of what you said, consider what Plato or Aristotle or Marcus Aurelius, people who have been dead for 10 times longer, but who are still offering philosophical and spiritual and virtual fucking guidance to millions of people across the fucking planet, and not for some fucking religious motivation, literally just secular descriptions of politics and how they work. Why would anybody, based off of your logic, why would anybody consider anything that these people had to say when they've literally been dead 10 times longer?
A historical understanding of where the points came from, and then that's the basis for like getting the better.
This is bullshit. Virtues don't change. Principles don't change. Power doesn't change. As a matter of fact, these things have been understood. No, these things have been understood for thousands of years.
Why do we have a different conception of what freedom means in the founding fathers?
Because people.
No, why do we have a different conception? If they don't change, why are you wrong? If they don't change, why are you wrong? Why do we have a different conception of what freedom means?
Bitch. Calm down, both of you, okay?
Yeah, I know.
Kai said,
coming up to Kentucky.
Joe, and then we're gonna wrap this up.
Yeah, I want to approach. Yeah, I want to approach something that Scott said and Connor said at the same time. Let's be careful with one thing, right? There are entire continents that had their own cultural expression, their own uniqueness within the world at large, and then a concentrated effort to colonize them and strip them of their humanity, their culture, and who they are is something that we ought to recognize. So I think that while we can agree that these ideas and these invocations of these, if I'm being quite frank, dead white guys, perpetuates itself all over society, we also never really looked at something else. Like we never were given the opportunity to, what are the perspectives of other individuals that these communities looked up to and respected? And due to a lot of reasons, they were kind of erased from society. But I think that's something we have to recognize. But I think something that Scott brought up, which is really important here, because this is my concern when navigating around white nationalists, is that one thing that they like to invoke is this idea that the founding fathers and these individuals of this country they're not kings, they're not monarchs, they're beyond that. They are these deities and these figures that ought to not be challenged in any way. And then what they do is they then go the next level down and say, like, this Constitution is a document that is consistent across all of society, and that we ought not to change it because it's essentially our Bible. So our founding fathers are our gods, and the Constitution and these documents they created are our Bibles. Now, I'm not saying that that's what every single individual who believes, right? Because I'm saying that this exists, and I've heard this within this particular space. But then when I branch it out, I see the consequences of that type of rhetoric, where people firmly don't believe that the Constitution is a living document. And there's people who firmly don't believe that the founding fathers are able to be critiqued. And then what sucks about it is that, like, we understand that we can critique anybody. Like, we critique each other right now. So why is it that these individuals found a way to transcend to a higher plane of consciousness? And I think, like, there's a lot of like adopting of other things unintentionally, but that's like a totally like, other thing.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up now. It's already pretty late, so you guys want ending statements, or you just want to wrap it up?
I think we should wrap it up.
I'm fine. To be honest with you,
Connie,
down for ending.
Connie, you said you wanted an ending statement.
It's okay. I'll just I just need 30 seconds on the clock.
Okay, Jangles will also get 30 seconds on the clock after, and we'll just wrap it up.
Okay. Benjamin Franklin said, "Love your enemies, for they tell you your faults. He that falls in love with himself will have no rivals. There was never a good war or a bad peace. He that lies down with dogs shall rise up with fleas. Better slip with the foot than the tongue. Look before, or you'll find yourself behind. Don't throw stones at your neighbors if you own windows that are glass. He that would live in peace at ease must not speak all he knows or judge all he sees. Well done is better than well said." So I could keep going, but he's got plenty of other anecdotes that I think apply just as much in 2021 as they did in the fucking 18th century.
Jangles?
Cool. I have an even better anecdote, all right? Good things are good, bad things are bad. This is kind of like the vacuous, like, nothing statements that I was talking about. Like, yeah, all these ideas are great. Yeah, I know. All these ideas are great. How are they implemented in 2021? All right, we can take these things. One, we shouldn't give credit to the founding fathers for thinking of these things. Do you really think that they were the first people to like think of these things? No, that's the entire point. I'm not saying that we should like destroy the founding fathers for being evil people. No, of course I'm not saying that. All I'm saying, and what I've said from the beginning, is that when you try to invoke the founding fathers as to what we should do today, to give guidance what we should do today, all these ideas have been expanded upon forever. You didn't answer this because you know I'm correct. Their idea of freedom looks vastly different than our idea of freedom because we have 250 years of awesome Americans who have expanded upon their good ideas. They had great ideas. We've done better than them. But, you know, they weren't great men. They were just good men at the right time. All right. The American people deserve the credit, not the founding fathers. All right. They were the instigator. They weren't even the instigators. All right. They were the leaders, but they were not the sole like progenitors of the American Revolution. And that is the real history of America. Like everyday Americans doing this job. Everyday Americans like pushing freedom. Everyday Americans like making the country better, fighting bigotry, fighting oppression, like promoting equality. That's the story of America, and that's what we should push. All right, we have a better idea today because of everyday Americans, not because of great men in history who decided to invent the idea of freedom.
Wonderful. 4-hour podcast. Who would have thought it? Thanks everybody for coming on. You all have a blessed weekend. I now have to do a charity stream. That's gonna be a blast. You all have a good one. Okay. See you guys later.
Hey, have a good one.